Chapter 2656. Mariana Trenchjongjian trembled in fear. He wasn't afraid of the armed police, but he was afraid of Zhuan. He clearly wanted to bring Zhuowen to have a good talk with Elder Chen, but he didn't expect Elder Chen to gather the armed police here to wait for him. Old Chen had a deep background, and he had connections with the Eastern Province's General Secretary. So he naturally had the ability to mobilize the armed police. Previously, Zhang Jin spoke to Old Chen over the phone and said that Zhuan wasn't an ordinary person. He was a godlike figure, and handguns were useless against such an existence. During the call, Old Chen agreed to it, but he never thought that he would play dirty. Old Chen, don't be rash. This is an existence that you can't afford to offend. You're courting death. Zhang Jin trembled as he immediately spoke to Old Chen behind the armed police. Old Chen replied in disdain, Zhang Jin, what era are we in now? What godlike figure are you talking about? Is there something wrong with your head? Back then, when Zhang Jin spoke to him over the phone, Zhang Jin described that Zhuowen could withstand bullets without any injuries. Old Chen sneered in his heart, but he wasn't bothered by it. In modern society, how could there be such a person? Furthermore, Old Chen was even more disdainful of godlike figures. It was just a superstition made up by the ancients. The secretary stood beside Old Chen with her head filled with confusion. She looked at Old Chen nervously and asked, Old Chen, you're not intending to deal with them, right? This is the company. Old Chen coldly snorted, if they know what's good for them, I will naturally not give the order to shoot. As he spoke, Old Chen looked at the white-clothed youth beside Zhang Zhen and asked, You're Zhuowen, right? I don't care how you stole my Kunlun Jade Pillar, but I'm giving you a chance. Hand over the Kunlun Jade Pillar, and you can still live. On the other hand, Zhang Zhen was anxious as he immediately explained to Zhuowen that this matter had nothing to do with him. Zhuowen patted Zhang Zhen's shoulder, indicating that he didn't blame the latter before he slowly walked towards Old Chen. He could tell that Zhang Zhen wasn't lying to him. It must be Old Chen who wanted to kill him. Are you courting death? Old Chen's face darkened as he looked at the white-clothed young man who was walking towards him slowly. His eyes were filled with hostility. The secretary standing beside Old Chen also looked at Zhuowen in disbelief. In front of so many guns, how could this young man still dare to move forward? Could it be that there is something wrong with this person's head? Unfortunately, Elder Chen's words had no effect on Zhuowen. Zhuowen continued to walk over slowly. Seeing that Zhuowen was about to reach the armed police, Old Chen's eyes flashed with a trace of ferocity as he shouted, Open fire! Elder Chen, the secretary looked at Old Chen in disbelief. This was a living person, and Old Chen actually gave the order to shoot. Bang bang bang. More than 30 pitch-black and ice-cold muzzles suddenly shot out dazzling sparks, and the sound of gunfire resounded in the corridor like thunder. The highest floor of the Jinya building should be bulletproof and equipped with excellent soundproof materials. Therefore, some of the bullets that missed only left bullet marks on the walls. The coldness in Old Chen's eyes was immediately replaced by shock because he found that the white-clothed young man in the middle of the gunfire did not stop moving forward at all. Moreover, if one looked carefully, one could see that there was an invisible ripple defense in front of the young man, blocking the bullets that fell in front of the young man. A continuous stream of bullets fell in front of the young man, and then the bullets rustled and fell one by one, gathering into a pile of bullets at the young man's feet. The more than 30 armed police also showed a look of horror, and the same thought appeared in their minds at the same time. Is this still a human? Bang bang bang. When Zhuowen came in front of the armed police, he waved his hand. Instantly, these armed police officers who were holding riot shields were all sent flying. They swayed left and right, crashed into the walls on both sides, and rolled on the ground continuously. This. Old Chen looked at this scene in disbelief, and the secretary beside him was even more shocked with her beautiful eyes wide open. Old Chen, is there anything else you need to entertain me with? Zhuowen asked casually. Old Chen sat on the ground, pointed at Zhuowen, and said incoherently, For you. Zhuowen grabbed Old Chen with his right hand and lifted him up. A cool energy entered Old Chen's body, calming the originally panicking Old Chen down. After all, Old Chen was a person who had been in a high position for a long time. Although what happened to Zhuowen just now was beyond common sense, He also knew that he still had a bargaining chip in his hand. Old Chen, don't think that just because you know the whereabouts of the other Kunlun Jade Pillar, you have a bargaining chip to negotiate with me. If you think so, I will immediately kill you and search your memory, and I will also know the whereabouts of the Kunlun Jade Pillar. Zhuowen's next words immediately made Old Chen disheartened. Old Chen's strategy was unparalleled, but in the face of absolute strength, a mere strategy was not worth mentioning. Moreover, after seeing Zhuowen's terrifying ability, Old Chen was not surprised that this person had the ability to search his memory. Sir, this old man only begs you to spare my life. I will immediately tell you the whereabouts of the Kunlun Jade Pillar. Old Chen finally gave in. Let's talk inside. Zhuowen put down Old Chen and said indifferently. Old Chen nodded repeatedly and ordered his secretary to prepare tea while he led Zhuowen into his office. Old Chen's office was extremely large, more than 300 square meters, and the interior decoration was also extremely luxurious. Zhuowen casually sat in Old Chen's office chair and looked at Old Chen, who was standing respectfully at the side. Zhang Zhen, on the other hand, was not far away, and his eyelids were lowered. Whether it was Old Chen or Zhuowen, their positions were much higher than his, and he was completely unable to get a word in. Speak. Zhuowen picked up the tea that his secretary had poured for him and slowly sipped it. For Zhuowen, directly searching Old Chen's memory was the best choice, but he did not intend to do so. In this mortal world, he did not intend to kill indiscriminately, as it would break the original rules of the mortal world. After all, the rules of Earth were not simple, and as long as it was not a big matter, Zhuowen would not kill indiscriminately. Old Chen wiped the cold sweat on his forehead and said, Actually, I do have another Kunlun Jade Pillar, but as a precaution, I hid it 10,000 meters under the Mariana Trench. Mariana Trench? Zhuowen narrowed his eyes. He was not unfamiliar with the Mariana Trench. It was said to be the deepest trench in the world, with a depth of 10,000 meters. However, the Mariana Trench was not within Huaxia, but in Southeast Asia near the Pacific Ocean. Zhuowen's divine sense was powerful enough, but after entering Earth, most of its power had been suppressed. At most, his divine sense could only scan Huaxia. Chapter 2657. Whereabouts? Take it out immediately and hand it over to me. Zhuowen said coldly. Old Chen sighed in his heart. The Kunlun Jade Pillar had the effect of prolonging one's life and strengthening one's body. He had been keeping the Kunlun Jade Pillar by his side all this time. His spirit was much better than before, as if he was 10 years younger. Now that both of his Kunlun Jade Pillars had been taken away by this person, he knew that he would no longer be able to enjoy the benefits of the Kunlun Jade Pillar. However, he also knew that compared to the Kunlun Jade Pillar, his life was more important. I have great use for the Kunlun Jade Pillar. I know why you mortals want the Kunlun Jade Pillar. Take this bottle of elixir. It will help you expel all kinds of diseases and prolong your life by at least 20 years. Yun casually tossed a jade bottle to Old Chen. Old Chen took the jade bottle skeptically. He opened the bottle out of curiosity and a medicinal aroma immediately filled the air. Just by smelling the medicinal fragrance, Elder Chen felt energized and his whole body felt light. Elder Chen's eyes were filled with excitement. He poured out a pill and couldn't wait to swallow it. Then, he was surprised to find that his body was warm, and he could clearly feel that his physical fitness was constantly improving and becoming stronger. Sir, this pill is so magical? Old Chen was excited. He wanted the Kunlun Jade Pillar because he wanted to use it to improve his body's quality. Since Yun had given him this pill, the Kunlun Jade Pillar was of little value to him. Moreover, he also found that the effect of this pill on his body was much stronger than the Kunlun Jade Pillar. The Kunlun Jade Pillar was not originally used for nourishing, but this pill was a medicinal herb that was specially used for the human body. It was normal that the effect on Old Chen was better than the Kunlun Jade Pillar. You gave me the Kunlun Jade Pillar, so what if I give you another bottle? Zhuowen took out another jade bottle and placed it on the table. He looked at Old Chen indifferently. Inside the jade bottle was a life-continuing pill. Moreover, it was only a mortal-grade pill. It had the effect of prolonging the life of a criminal without any cultivation base, But for a cultivator of Zhuowen's level, it was simply trash. Zhuon could easily refine such an elixir. The reason he gave it to Old Qin was because he wanted Old Qin to willingly hand over the Kunlun jade pillar. Sure enough, after Zhuon took out such a pill and hinted that he had more pills in his possession, Elder Chen's thoughts about the Kunlun jade pillar lessened. Furthermore, in order to obtain the other bottle of pills in Zhuowen's hands, he couldn't wait to hand over the other Kunlun jade pillar to Zhuon. Suddenly, Elder Chen's phone rang. Chen Lao looked at Zhuon and didn't answer the phone. "Take it." The bell rang several times before Zhuon finally spoke. Old Qin nodded and picked up the phone to answer the call. His face immediately changed. "What's wrong?" Zhuowen's eyes flickered. The Kunlun jade pillar was found by the Country F army in the Mariana Trench and was seized by them. "My people were basically all killed," Old Qin said angrily. "Country F?" Zhuon asked. In his previous life, Zhuon was a university student in Huaxia, so he was naturally familiar with the countries in the world. Country F was located in the Western Pacific Ocean and was a multi-ethnic archipelago country in Southeast Asia. The Mariana Trench wasn't far from Country F. Although the Mariana Trench isn't far from Country F, you place the Kunlun jade pillar 10,000 meters under the sea. Generally speaking, it shouldn't have been discovered by Country F. Zhuon said lightly. Old Qin sighed. It should be a spy who leaked the news. It's hard to guard against a thief in the family. Now that the Kunlun jade pillar should be in the hands of Country F's president, this is troublesome. Speaking of this, Old Qin frowned. Although the Realm Knight Corporation that he controlled was huge, it was only a local tyrant in Jinling City. Compared to a country like Country F, it paled in comparison. Although Country F was only a small country, it still had complete military resources. It wasn't something that a mere corporation could compare to. "Sir, what should we do?" Old Qin looked at Zhuon and was quite anxious. Although Zhuon was powerful and couldn't even deal with guns, could he fight against cannons, fighter jets, and tanks? "Follow me to Country F," Zhuon said lightly. "Sir, what do you plan to do when you go to Country F?" Old Qin had a bad feeling. "I'm going to rob them. If Country F doesn't give it to me, then I'll just destroy them." Zhuon's voice was cold. Although he didn't want to cause trouble on Earth, this matter involved the Kunlun jade pillar, so he naturally had to take extreme measures. "What? Sir, that's a country, and Country F's armed forces are made up of regular army, reserve army, and paramilitary forces. Among them, the regular army has 109,000 soldiers. The active army has 66,000 soldiers, organized into 8 infantry divisions, 23 infantry brigades, 8 artillery battalions, 1 armored brigade, 5 special forces brigades, and 1 presidential guard. The Navy has 26,000 soldiers, organized into 1 fleet headquarters, 6 Navy headquarters, and 4 Marine brigades. The Air Force has 17,000 soldiers, organized into 3 air divisions, 9 flying wings, and 7 service support wings. There's no way we can fight against such a large force. "Sir, although you're strong, that's an entire country," Old Qin quickly said. Zhuon smiled and didn't explain. Instead, he said lightly, "Old Qin, you should have a private jet, right? Take me to Country F tomorrow. Also, inform the president of Country F to hand over the Kunlun jade pillar. Otherwise, Country F will cease to exist." Old Qin hesitated. Country F was a country, and Zhuon dared to say such arrogant words. This was simply asking for death. Moreover, he was so brazen. Wasn't this telling Country F that not only did he dare to visit, but he also dared to destroy Country F by himself? This was definitely a slap to Country F's face. Old Qin believed that if he dared to bring Zhuowen's words to the president of Country F, when they entered Country F, what awaited them would be a fully armed army of 100,000, as well as terrifying tanks, cannons, and fighter jets. "What? Didn't you hear what I said?" Zhuon looked at Old Qin, and a sharp killing intent suddenly attacked him. Old Qin was so scared that he fell to the ground. Yes. This old man will immediately do as you say." Old Qin felt bitter. He wasn't an idiot. He knew that if he dared to not do as Zhuon said, he would immediately be destroyed. The next day, An earth-shattering piece of news was spreading all over the world at lightning speed. It was said that there was a person in Huaxia named Zhuan who threatened to take something from the president of country F, and if the president didn't hand it over, he would destroy country F himself. This news was so shocking that many people, after being shocked, subconsciously thought that there was something wrong with this person's head. All the major forces in the world, both in the open and in the dark, were closely watching country F and the young man named Zhuan. Chapter 2658. Slanding in country F. What is the origin of this person? He dares to go against a country by himself? Oh my God, this man may have lost his mind. God, please save this lost lamb. This person is from Huaxia. Will it affect the relationship between Huaxia and country F? The world's leaders were also paying close attention and received news from intelligence agents from time to time. Although they all thought that the young man was crazy, what really caught their attention was country F's actions. Because according to the information they received, country F gathered 100,000 regular troops in the name of a drill and gathered all these regular troops in country F's capital, Manila. The world leaders were not fools. They all knew that country F's drill was fake and that it was probably to guard against the young man named Jun. Of course, what they could not understand was that country F was too much. He was just an ordinary person. Was there a need to gather 100,000 regular troops? Inside the presidential palace in City M, President Duterte frowned. He held a slender jade pillar in his hand as if he was thinking about something. Mr. President, the Realm Knight Corporation's private jet has left Huaxia and will arrive in country F in about an hour. A general in military uniform stood straight and stared at Duterte, who was sitting in a chair in front of him and thinking hard. Launch a long-range missile and shoot down that private jet. Duterte tapped the table with his right hand and said lightly. The general nodded. Although he felt that Duterte's decision was making a mountain out of a molehill, he did not refute his president. After the general left, a charming woman slowly walked in from the back door. The woman had a perfect body and delicate face. She was a peerless beauty. Mr. President, why did you mobilize so many people? You're only dealing with one person, not an entire country. The charming woman leaned on Duterte's body and said softly, From the captives we captured, it is said that the Realm Knight Corporation sent a godlike person who is not afraid of bullets. Although I know that I mobilized so many people, it's never wrong to be careful. Anyway, this is just a drill. I don't think Huaxia will have any excuse to make trouble for us if we accidentally hit a private jet with a long-range missile. After all, this can only be considered an accident. Duterte hugged the woman and said with a smirk, Mr. President, you're still so wise. The woman whispered into Duterte's ear. Suddenly, the sound of hurried footsteps came from outside. Then, the general who had just left hurriedly walked in. What's wrong? Duterte asked coldly. The general bent down and said in a trembling voice, General, the long-range missile failed? Duterte said nonchalantly, Since the launch failed, then launch another one. How do you usually train your subordinates to make such mistakes? The general quickly shook his head and said, Mr. President, the long-range missile was successfully launched, but the long-range missile hit the plane and exploded. However, the plane is safe and sound and continues to fly towards us. Nothing happened even after a long-range missile hit the plane? Are you trying to make fun of me? Duterte thought that the general was joking and said with an unfriendly expression, No, Mr. President, look at this video. This is the surveillance video from the missile department. The general quickly took out a tablet and turned it on. The video showed a small private plane. When the rainbow-like missile appeared in the video, it directly exploded on the plane. Then, a miraculous scene appeared. In the terrifying explosion, the plane slowly flew out without any damage. How is this possible? The president and the woman were stunned. Continue to launch the missiles. I don't believe that we can't destroy this plane, Duterte said while panting. The general left the presidential palace uneasily. He didn't know why, but when he found that the plane was ineffective against the long-range missile, he felt uneasy. We're not dead? Inside the plane, Old Chen, the secretary, Zhang Zhen, and the pilot looked around in fear. When they found that they were still in the plane and that the plane was intact, they all showed expressions of relief. The moment the long-range missile landed on the plane, they thought that they were finished. They didn't expect that they were fine. Then, their eyes all fell on the young man sitting on the left, leisurely leaning against the wall. They knew that the reason why the plane was fine was most likely related to this young man. Not good, a few more long-range missiles are coming. The pilot's panicked voice came. Old Chen and the others' hearts were in their throats, but they soon found that the long-range missiles still landed on the plane, but they were still fine. But the more it was like this, the more they respected the young man sitting leisurely on the side. Even long-range missiles couldn't do anything to this person. How terrifying was this person? When the plane finally landed in Country F under the bombardment of countless long-range missiles, the leaders of Country F and even the whole world were shocked. Everyone realized that something was wrong. Country F's President Duterte even walked out of his palace and stared at the small plane in the sky. "Fighter team, get ready. Destroy this plane." Duterte reacted quickly and immediately gave the order. Soon, in Country F, more than 10 fighter jets flew out. These fighter jets spewed out terrifying jets and then flew high into the sky at an extremely fast speed. More than a dozen fighter jets surrounded the small plane and released their missiles. More than 10 missiles bombarded the small plane. In the sky, a dazzling explosion of energy dust attracted the attention of everyone in Country F. Immediately after, the people of Country F were shocked to find that the small plane that was attacked leisurely flew out of the explosion, and then a bloody light flew out of the plane. Everyone only saw the bloody light flash in the sky, and more than 10 fighter jets all exploded. Amidst the countless explosions, the small plane slowly landed in City M's harbor. At this moment, City M's harbor was surrounded by 100,000 regular soldiers, and nearly 100 tanks surrounded the harbor. The door of the small plane opened, and a young man in casual clothes was the first to walk out. The bloody light in the sky landed next to the young man. Chapter 2659. Duterte's despair. Duterte saw from the computer screen that the blood sword destroyed the few dozen fighter jets of Country F and landed beside the youth in casual clothes. His face was full of disbelief. "Mr. President, this is not a human. Do we still have to continue?" An officer beside Duterte was trembling. His voice was full of fear. He never thought that a human could have such terrifying power. In other words, was this really a human? Now, the officer was hoping that Duterte would immediately stop the war and make peace. Duterte's pupils shrank. Although he was shocked by Zhuowen's move, he was still the leader of a country. His mind was naturally more mature than the average person. Duterte held the Kunlun jade pillar in his hand. He knew that the youth came for the Kunlun jade pillar. If it was before, Duterte would definitely not care about the Kunlun jade pillar. But now that Duterte had experienced the benefits of the Kunlun jade pillar, he naturally would not let it go so easily. Moreover, this person only brought a few people and forcefully landed in Country F. He was the president of Country F. If he was trampled on like this and had to hand over the pillar in his hand with a smile, Country F's reputation in the world would really be tarnished. This person may be an ancient martial arts master in Huaxia, but he is only one person. We have more than 100,000 soldiers. Why should we be afraid of this person? Duterte sneered and continued, "General Booker, pass down my order. Kill this person on the spot. Leave no one alive." General Booker was the officer next to Duterte. General Booker smiled bitterly. He did not expect the president to still want to attack after seeing this person's inhuman strength. He did not know if it was right or wrong for Country F to provoke such a strong person. However, General Booker also thought that Country F's 100,000 soldiers were enough to take down the youth. After all, he was only one person, while they had a powerful army of 100,000. Zhuan walked down and stood in place. Elder Chen, Zhang Zhen, and the others walked down and stood behind Zhuan. When Old Chen and the others saw the endless army surrounding them, as well as the pitch-black muzzles of nearly 100 tanks aimed at them, they were all scared witless and trembling. Their hearts were beating like drums. Facing such a powerful army, did the young man in front of them really have a chance of winning? Zhuan stood in place, not because he was afraid of the surrounding troops, but because he was waiting for Country F President Duterte's decision. If Duterte obediently handed over the Kunlun Jade Pillar, he would naturally not start a massacre but leave. Unfortunately, what happened next did not go as Zhuo had expected. The surrounding troops began to get restless. Soon after, concentrated gunshots rang out and countless sparks burst forth, shooting toward Zhuan. At the same time, the cannons on the tanks fired at the same time. Terrifying shells exploded on the spot like fireworks. Suddenly, the place where Zhuo and the others were was turned into ruins. Only the embryonic form of a large crater could be vaguely seen in the smoke. Duterte saw this scene on the computer screen and revealed a smug smile. In his view, no matter how powerful the youth was, he would definitely die in such a hail of bullets. But soon, he was shocked to find that in the smoke, a blood-red light soared into the sky. Then, a ring-shaped blood-red light swept in all directions. Wherever the blood-red light passed, whether it was the army, the fortifications, or the tanks, everything was annihilated into nothingness. In just an instant, the surrounding 100,000 soldiers were all annihilated by the blood-red light and turned into nothingness as if they were vaporized. Duterte watched the army. He relied on being annihilated just like that. He stood in place as if he was petrified. General Booker also came in at this moment, but he looked like he had lost his soul, like a walking corpse. Mr. President, our country F's regular army was annihilated. General Booker's mouth was full of bitterness. He half knelt on the ground, his voice trembling. Duterte suddenly smashed the computer, like a violent lion, and said, "I don't believe it, I don't believe it. It's just one person. How could he have such powerful strength? This person must have used some kind of camouflage, or my computer must have been hacked. That must be it." General Booker just silently knelt in front of him and did not say anything. He knew that he could not speak at will now. "Your country F's President Duterte?" Suddenly, a calm voice was heard. But strangely, the voice did not appear in the room, but in the minds of General Booker and Duterte. Duterte subconsciously took a few steps back. Looking at the youth in casual clothes slowly walking in from the front door of the presidential palace, the fear in his eyes became more intense. It should be noted that the presidential palace was at least 200 kilometers away from the port. Even with the fastest sports car, it would take more than an hour. However, it had only been a few minutes since this person destroyed the regular army, and he had already arrived at the presidential palace. What kind of speed was this? Old Chen, Zhang Zhen, and the others followed behind Zhuan. They looked at Zhuan with eyes full of fanaticism and awe. The move that Zhuan showed just now was really shocking. They really could not imagine how a human could have such power. Only an immortal could have such means. This was the consensus in the hearts of Old Chen, Zhang Zhen, and the others. General Booker, who was kneeling on the ground, was so frightened that he quickly got up and wanted to escape. Unfortunately, Zhuan only looked at General Booker indifferently, and the latter fell to the ground as if he was electrocuted. He died just like that. Zhuan was no stranger to General Booker. This guy was the one who ordered the regular army to attack him. Of course, he also knew that it was under Duterte's instructions. However, there was no doubt that General Booker was an accomplice. Duterte was completely shocked. Only then did he realize that his presidential palace had become much quieter than usual. It should be known that the presidential palace's security was the strictest in the entire country of Country F. Now that someone had forced their way in, logically speaking, the garrison should have already been alerted. However, there was no movement at all. Obviously, Duterte also knew that the garrison stationed in the presidential palace had already been attacked. "Duterte, I have already asked Old Chen to speak to you. Hand over the Kunlun Jade Pillar, and I, Tian, will not blame Country F. Unfortunately, your choice has disappointed me." Zhuo continued to speak. Although Country F's language was different from Huaxia's, Zhuo had already flipped through Country F's language dictionary before coming to Country F. It only took him a few minutes to master Country F's language. Chapter 2660. Uncovering the stalker, hurriedly presented the Kunlun Jade Pillar with both hands and said with a trembling voice, "Immortal Master, This is the Kunlun Jade Pillar. I didn't know about it because I didn't receive Elder Chen's message. Now, I finally know that this Kunlun Jade Pillar belongs to you. Zhuan sneered in his heart. He knew that Duterte was lying through his teeth when he saw his expression. If Elder Chen didn't inform Duterte, how could Duterte muster so many people to carry out the drill? Zhuan took the Kunlun Jade Pillar, and a surge of energy immediately gushed out. Duterte screamed and smashed into the wall behind him. He was dead. Zhuan's gaze was cold. He didn't even look at Duterte. When Duterte wanted to kill him, he was already a dead man in Zhuan's heart. Let's go. Zhuan took the Kunlun Jade Pillar and ignored Elder Chen and the others who were petrified. Instead, he walked straight out of the presidential palace. Not long after they walked out of the presidential palace, Zhuan waved his sleeve, and the huge presidential palace behind him collapsed. The moment the presidential palace collapsed, the entire country of Country F was in chaos. Sir, our private jet has been destroyed. How do we return to Huaxia next? Elder Chen asked cautiously. Just follow me. Zhuan waved his sleeve again. Elder Chen and the others felt the world spin. When they came to their senses, they found themselves standing on the top floor of the Realm Night Group. Is this teleportation? In just a short while, we left Country F and came to Jinling? Elder Chen and the others looked out through the transparent glass. When they found that the scenery outside was indeed the Jinling city in their memories, the fear in their hearts reached its peak. Teleportation was already an immortal's ability. However, when they thought of the various supernatural powers that Zhuan had shown before, Elder Chen and the others felt that it was reasonable. They were even more in awe of Zhuan. I'll stay with the Realm Night Group for the time being. Once I've collected all the Kunlun Jade Pillars, I'll naturally leave. Zhuan glanced at Old Chen. After saying this, he entered the Realm Night Group, randomly chose the most spacious room, and went into seclusion. Of course, Zhuan was not really in seclusion. Instead, he planned to use this time to find the other 13 Kunlun Jade Pillars. When he scanned China, he had already confirmed the location of the 13 Kunlun Jade Pillars. Now that he had found the Kunlun Jade Pillar in Country F, the other 13 Kunlun Jade Pillars would be much easier. Of course, Zhuan did not plan to search for them himself. Instead, he sent Bloodscale to search for the 13 Kunlun Jade Pillars. He planned to spend the rest of his time on Earth as an ordinary person. For the rest of the time, Zhuan was like an ordinary young man. He went shopping, watched movies, or entertained himself. It was as if Zhuan had really become an ordinary person. Finally, on the third day, Bloodscale came back with the 13 Kunlun Jade Pillars. When the 15 Kunlun Jade Pillars were suspended side by side in front of Zhuan, they emitted a blazing jade-colored light. Immediately, the 15 Kunlun Jade Pillars merged together, forming a thicker and longer jade pillar. This jade pillar was exactly the same as the one in the green-haired mummy's hand. I finally found the second jade pillar. It seems that we can go to Kunlun Mountain now. The green-haired mummy's eyes flickered with anticipation. The next day, Zhuan left a bottle of elixir for Old Chen and the others and left Jinling City without saying goodbye. Of course, with their speed, they arrived at Kunlun Mountain in an instant. Kunlun Mountain was the first sacred mountain in China's legends. Since ancient times, there were many myths and legends about Kunlun Mountain. Kunlun Mountain was also known as the ancestor of the dragon veins. When Zhuan arrived at Kunlun Mountain and saw the majestic and vast mountain range in the northwest of China, his eyes narrowed. This was because he felt a trace of energy in the Kunlun Mountain range. This energy was not the energy of the stars, but an energy that was of a higher level than the energy of the stars. Heavenly Path's origin energy? Zhuan's eyes were filled with shock. In the Kunlun Mountain range, there was actually Heavenly Path's origin energy that was of a higher level than the energy of the stars. Moreover, this was only a planet. It was undoubtedly unbelievable. You felt it too, right? There is definitely Heavenly Path's origin energy in the Kunlun Mountain range. It's just a planet, and I think that other than the land of origin, I can't think of any other place that has Heavenly Path's origin energy, the green-haired mummy said calmly. Previously, this fellow had sneaked out alone and came to Mount Kunlun several times. When he realized that he couldn't open the restriction around Mount Kunlun with just one jade pillar, he came back to help Zhuowen collect the Kunlun jade pillars. Of course, Zhuowen knew that if a single jade pillar could open the seal around Kunlun Mountain, this guy would definitely enter Kunlun Mountain alone. He would definitely not leave any benefits for Zhuowen. Kid, before we open the seal, I think we should work together to find the two stalkers behind us. Just as Zhuowen was about to enter Kunlun Mountain, the green-haired mummy suddenly spoke. Zhuowen's eyes were filled with doubt, and his expression changed slightly. Along the way, he basically did not find any signs of being followed. The green-haired mummy sneered and said coldly to somewhere behind him, "Do you want me to find you? Or do you want to come out on your own?" Zhuowen followed the gaze of the green-haired mummy and fell on a mountain behind them. His eyes were filled with doubt. He did not feel that the mountain was unusual, and his divine sense did not detect anything hidden in the mountain. However, Zhuowen soon discovered that two wriggling human figures had appeared on the surface of the mountain. Soon after, the wriggling human figures became more and more awake. In the end, they transformed into a woman in a Cheongsam and a steel giant. These two people were Fire Plume and Steel Plume of the Purple Red House who had been following Zhuowen and the others. At this moment, Fire Plume and Steel Plume were also looking at the green-haired mummy with a strange expression. The concealment talisman they used was extremely advanced. Even a second-step Dao confirming expert might not be able to detect them. However, the green-haired mummy actually discovered them, and from the looks of it, it should have discovered them a long time ago. "Why are you two following us?" After Zhuowen discovered the two people, his face suddenly became gloomy, and at the same time, he was a little vigilant. He knew that these two people must have been following them for a long time, but he did not notice them at all. It was likely that these two people had used some kind of extremely powerful concealment method. Chapter 2661. Kunlun the green-haired corpse shrugged and said, "Why are you looking at me like that? I just found out too." Zhuowen naturally wouldn't believe the green-haired corpse's nonsense. Instead, he looked at Fire Plume and Steel Plume and continued, "You too, why have you been following me for so long?" After saying this, Zhuowen's eyes were filled with killing intent as he stared at Fire Plume and Steel Plume. Fire Plume frowned slightly and said in a low voice, "Brother Zhuo, we're actually looking for you to cooperate? Are you looking for the origin ground?" Zhuowen narrowed his eyes. He didn't expect Fire Plume to know about the origin ground. Seeing Zhuowen fall silent, Huiyu continued, "Actually, it's like this. The news of the land of origin has already spread like wildfire in the Xianmi heavenly domain. You might not know this, but most of the cultivators here are actually here for the land of origin. And more cultivators will come because the origin ground is in your 8 heavenly regions." Zhuowen frowned and said, "How did your Xianmi heavenly region know about the origin ground in the 8 heavenly regions?" Fire Plume said indifferently, "Blood Prison's Shui Wuhan provided the information. After he returned to the Xianmi heavenly region, he spread the news of the origin ground and attracted the attention of many cultivators." Fire Plume continued, "Don't worry, as long as you let us enter the origin ground, we definitely won't reveal this place. Of course, if you're not willing, then I can only spread the news." "You dare?" the green-haired corpse said coldly, his killing intent soaring to the sky. Steel Plume and Fire Plume's pupils shrank at the same time after sensing the terrifying killing intent of the green-haired corpse. They didn't expect the green-haired corpse to be so terrifying that it could release such a terrifying killing intent. "If you really want to make a move, I don't mind spreading the news. I don't think you guys are that impulsive. Letting the two of us in is better than letting a group of outsiders in," Steel Plume suddenly said. "Let them in," Zhuowen said. Zhuowen could sense that Steel Plume wasn't simple. At the very least, he wasn't confident that he could kill the two of them before they spread the news. Moreover, he didn't think that the green-haired corpse could do it either. Although this guy was full of killing intent and looked very strong, he was actually a paper tiger. After all, this guy's strength had dropped too much. Now, he was only on par with Zhuowen's 2-star Pangu's sacred body. This time, this guy is the one making the decision. Since he has agreed, I have no objections. Otherwise, I would have killed you 2 ants long ago. Under Zhuowen's strange gaze, the green-haired corpse pretended to cast a sidelong glance at Steel Plume and Fire Plume. Immediately, it slowly withdrew the killing intent on its body. Steel Plume and Fire Plume naturally didn't know the details of the green-haired corpse. Seeing that the green-haired corpse had withdrawn its killing intent, the two of them finally felt relieved. You should pay a price. Do you want us to take you in for free? Zhuowen suddenly said coldly. Fire Plume smiled. She had already expected this. With a wave of her hand, she took out a jade slip and threw it to Zhuowen. This is... Zhuowen frowned slightly. This is the first 2 moves of the tyrannical Dao slaying technique. Fire Plume said lightly. Zhuowen was stunned. He checked it with his divine sense and revealed a look of ecstasy. You actually have the complete tyrannical Dao slaying technique. Zhuowen said happily. The tyrannical Dao slaying technique had a total of 3 moves. The first move was the slaughtering Dao finger. Zhuowen had already cultivated it to the peak. 1 finger was enough to kill an ordinary heavenly Dao master. The second move was the slaughtering Dao palm. It was said that it could kill an ordinary heavenly Dao master. The third move was the slaughtering Dao hand. It was the most powerful move. When cultivated to the peak, it could kill a heavenly Dao master. Fire Plume and Steel Plume looked at Zhuowen strangely as he treated the tyrannical Dao slaying technique like a treasure. To be honest, although the tyrannical Dao slaying technique was much more powerful than an ordinary Dao technique, it was an existence that could be found at a roadside stall in the Xianmi heavenly territory. The main reason was that the tyrannical Dao slaying technique could only be cultivated to the heavenly Dao master. After a cultivator attained Dao, he naturally needed to cultivate a corresponding Dao technique. The higher the level of the Dao technique, the better. A Dao technique like the tyrannical Dao slaying technique, which could only be cultivated to the heavenly Dao master, was disdained by most cultivators in the Xianmi heavenly territory. This was because once a Dao technique was cultivated, it was very difficult to change to another Dao technique. The gains did not make up for the losses. Once a Dao technique was chosen, it naturally had to be perfect. For example, the tyrannical Dao slaying technique only had 3 moves. It could only be cultivated to the heavenly Dao master. This cultivator would be delusional if he wanted to step into the second step of Dao validation. Even though the tyrannical Dao slaying technique was indeed powerful, not many people were willing to cultivate such a Dao technique. Of course, there were people who cultivated the tyrannical Dao slaying technique. Generally, in the Xianmi heavenly territory, it was the itinerant cultivators who were struggling and had no choice but to choose to cultivate the tyrannical Dao slaying technique. This was the first time Fire Plume had seen someone so ecstatic after obtaining the tyrannical Dao slaying technique. Fire Plume wanted to remind him but was stopped by Steel Plume. Zhuowen obviously did not know the flaws of the tyrannical Dao slaying technique. Now that they could use this tyrannical Dao slaying technique to exchange for entering the land of origin, it would be best. Otherwise, Zhuowen would definitely ask for an exorbitant price, which would not be good for them. Fire Plume also thought of this and nodded silently. However, looking at Zhuowen's ecstatic expression, he felt a little pity in his heart. Zhuowen put away the jade slip and nodded to Fire Plume with satisfaction. Okay, this thing happens to be what I need. I won't take anything else from you. Next, Zhuowen and the others began to rush towards the Kunlun Mountains. Soon, under the guidance of the green-haired corpse, the group stopped in a canyon in the deepest part of the Kunlun Mountains. This canyon was surrounded by mountains. White snow drifted down, creating a world of ice and snow. Green Hat, is the entrance you mentioned last time here? Zhuowen asked. The green-haired corpse nodded and immediately came to the center of the canyon. In the center of the canyon, there was a rock that was about 10 feet tall. This rock was extremely irregular and looked strange. And strangely, in this snowy canyon, there was no snow on the surface of the rock. It was really strange. The green-haired corpse took out 2 jade pillars and immediately cleared the snow under the rock. Then, Zhuowen saw that there were 2 grooves below that could fit the 2 jade pillars. The moment the jade pillars were inserted into the grooves, the entire Kunlun Mountains began to shake. Chapter 2662. Extreme Blade Array. The abyss was extremely deep and bottomless. Whether it was steel plume, fire plume, or blood scale, their divine senses could not see what was inside the abyss. Only Zhuowen and the green-haired mummy frowned the moment the abyss appeared. Zhuowen's divine soul had been improved by the Panga banner and had become extremely powerful. Because his divine soul was too powerful, Zhuowen could only mobilize a part of its divine soul power. Zhuowen knew very well that his current strength was too weak. Although his divine soul had been modified to become extremely powerful, it was a pity that he could only use a part of its divine soul power. However, he believed that as his strength slowly increased, the amount of divine soul power he could use would naturally rise as well. It was this powerful divine soul that made Zhuowen aware of the horror in the abyss. He could vaguely feel that there was an extremely powerful rule power in the abyss. If he fell in, he would be seriously injured even if he did not die. This feeling shocked Zhuowen. His current doppelganger had cultivated the two-star Pangu's sacred body. Its physical body was extremely tough and powerful. Even Lord Hunyuan might not necessarily be able to defeat him. However, there was a force in the abyss that made him feel the threat of death. This showed how terrifying and powerful the force in the abyss was. Zhuowen glanced at the expressions of the others and found that Fire Plume, Blood Scale, and Steel Plume were at a loss. Obviously, the three of them did not feel that there was anything wrong with the abyss below. The green-haired mummy also had a dignified look. Obviously, like Zhuowen, they had also discovered the difference in the abyss. Is this the entrance to the land of origin? Fire Plume looked at the dark abyss below her and frowned slightly. Yes, but this abyss is very dangerous. Zhuowen nodded and immediately looked at the green-haired mummy. He asked in a deep voice, "Green Hat, what kind of power exists in the abyss?" I think that even second-step Dao confirming cultivators might fall into this abyss. The moment he said that, Fire Plume and the other two were shocked. Fire Plume said in disbelief, "Are you trying to scare me? If you don't believe me, you can go in and feel it for yourself." Zhuowen mocked. Fire Plume stomped her foot, her face flushed red with anger. She said coldly, "Let's go in then." However, just as Fire Plume wanted to go in and try, he was stopped by Steel Plume. "Miss, please be careful. Let's try using a substitute puppet first," Steel Plume said. Fire Plume calmed down. She had been angry just now, but now that she had calmed down, she knew that she had been too impulsive. Although she and Steel Plume didn't find anything dangerous in the abyss, they still had to be cautious. Fire Plume took out a puppet from her spirit ring. This puppet was made of straw and was no different from an ordinary puppet. Zhuowen was surprised. He sensed a Taoist rhyme aura from this straw puppet. Moreover, this Taoist rhyme aura also contained a trace of vitality. The moment Fire Plume activated the puppet, the vitality hidden in the Taoist rhyme bloomed like 100 flowers and became more and more exuberant. In the end, the puppet actually stood up like a living person. Although this puppet was only the size of a palm, the aura on its body was extremely powerful. Zhuowen estimated that this puppet should have the strength of a half-step heavenly Tao master. It could be said that this kind of thing was basically an invincible existence in the 8 heavens. However, in Fire Plume's hands, it was just a puppet that was like a toy. It was obvious how rich Fire Plume was. After Fire Plume left her divine sense on the puppet, it stood up as if it had come to life. Then, it jumped out and entered the abyss. Soon, Fire Plume spat out a mouthful of blood. Her beautiful eyes revealed a look of horror. "Miss, what's wrong?" Steel Plume's expression changed. "There is a terrifying force in this abyss." The puppet was blasted to pieces by this force when it entered about 1,000 meters. Fire Plume's face was gloomy. Then she looked coldly at Zhuowen. However, she couldn't say anything. After all, Zhuowen had already warned her that this abyss was not simple. It was just that she didn't believe him. However, Fire Plume found it strange that Zhuowen knew that this abyss was not simple. After all, she and Steel Plume had used their divine senses to explore this abyss. However, they didn't find anything wrong with this abyss. What they didn't know was that Zhuowen's divine sense was much stronger than theirs. At a glance, he could see that there was a powerful concealment array inside this abyss. This concealment array just happened to conceal that force. Ordinary cultivators wouldn't be able to detect that such a terrifying force existed in the abyss. This force is too terrifying. Steel Plume, even if you go in, I think it will be very difficult. Your life might even be in danger, Fire Plume said in a deep voice. Steel Plume's expression changed slightly. He could see that Fire Plume was extremely afraid of the force in the abyss. Then what should we do? Steel Plume asked worriedly. Fire Plume also looked at the green-haired corpse. Just now, when Juan discovered that something was wrong with the abyss, he immediately asked the green-haired corpse. Obviously, this green-haired corpse wasn't as simple as it appeared to be. The green-haired corpse said indifferently, "This is the extreme blade array at the entrance of the land of origin. It's a Genesis grade array. I don't know which little guy set it up back then." What? A Genesis grade array? Fire Plume, Steel Plume, and Bloodscale cried out in shock at the same time. Their voices were full of disbelief. Even Juan was shocked by this. He was no longer the newbie from before. He had a certain understanding of the Tao validation stage. A Genesis grade array could already trap a god of creation, and a god of creation was a genuine third-step Tao validation stage mighty figure. Such a powerful being could kill any one of them with a flick of his finger. According to what you said, if it's a Genesis grade array, we won't be able to enter at all, Juan said with a frown. He knew that the green-haired corpse was determined to obtain the terrain of the land of origin. There was no way it wouldn't think of a way. Moreover, he also knew that the green-haired corpse's origins were mysterious. It knew much more about the land of origin than he did, so it definitely had a way to deal with this. This array is much weaker than before, but it's still very powerful. If you want me to force my way in, I might be able to force my way in, but you guys... The green-haired corpse looked at Juan, Fire Plume, and the others with a disdainful smile. Fire Plume was infuriated. However, when it thought of the powerful murderous aura that the green-haired corpse had just released, it could only swallow its anger. Juan chuckled coldly in his mind. Of course, Juan knew that the green-haired corpse's physical body was extremely tough. However, he also knew that this guy's power had greatly decreased. Even if they could force their way in, they wouldn't be able to gain anything. He definitely had another way. But I still have a way. Chapter 2663. The Origin entrance. Juan was stunned. He glanced at the green-haired mummy. He was wondering why the mummy had been following him ever since he left the ominous vein. It turned out that it wanted to make use of his Panga banner. However, he still asked skeptically, "Are you sure that the Panga banner can weaken the power of this formation? You should know that I don't know how to use it at all." The green-haired mummy said indifferently, "You're too weak. It's wishful thinking if you want to use the Panga banner. However, the Panga banner has acknowledged you. You have the aura of the Panga banner on you. This extreme blade formation won't harm you at all." Juan frowned. Although he was puzzled, he could tell that the mummy didn't seem to be lying to him. With that thought, Juan looked at Fire Plume and Steel Plume and said, "We have a way to enter the abyss. However, if you want to follow us in, you'll have to pay a price." Fire Plume stomped her feet in anger. She felt that Juan was too shameless. He was actually bargaining again. "Tell me, what do you want?" Fire Plume said coldly. "I'm very interested in pills and formations. I don't know if you have any books on these two fields. The higher the level, the better." Juan rubbed his hands and said, he had inherited the Pill Emperor Flame's knowledge of alchemy. In fact, it was very easy for him to become a heavenly Tao alchemist. However, he didn't have the corresponding pill recipes. If he had also inherited the Pill Emperor Flame's memories, perhaps he wouldn't have to worry about pill recipes. Unfortunately, he had only inherited the Pill Emperor Flame's knowledge. This was what made Juan the most speechless. He had a lifetime of knowledge, but he didn't have any pill recipes to practice on. What a scam! Moreover, his formation skills had already reached the pinnacle of the 9th level. As long as he had the corresponding books on formations, it wouldn't be too much of a problem for him to break through to the Heavenly Tao Divine Formation Master level. Books on alchemy and array formation? You're also a pill master and array master? Fire Plume asked suspiciously. Zhuan admitted that he was a 9th-grade alchemist and a god formation master. It was only because the 8 heavens didn't have any higher-grade books in this field that he hadn't successfully broken through yet. I do have some basic pill Dao and array Dao manuals on me. Before Fire Plume could finish speaking, he was interrupted by Zhuan, who said, I need high-grade records of alchemy and formations. If it's from a street stall, then forget it. Fire Plume was furious, but there was nothing she could do. She frowned and took out a golden book from her spirit ring. This is the highest level alchemy book I have on me. As for the Tao of Arrays, it's only a basic book. If you're still not satisfied, then I can't do anything about it. Miss, this alchemy book is... Steel Plume's expression changed slightly, but he was stopped by Fire Plume. Zhuan could tell that this alchemy book was extraordinary from Steel Plume's expression. He took the alchemy book, flipped through it casually, and was immediately engrossed in it. This was because the alchemy book was filled with all kinds of pill recipes. It could be said that there were hundreds of different styles and varieties. Most of the pill recipes for the first step of Dao validation were recorded in it. With this alchemy book, it really wasn't difficult for Zhuan to refine heavenly Dao, primordial Dao, and mixed essence divine pills. As for the array Dao manual that Fire Plume gave him, although it was very basic, it could still help him break through to the heavenly Dao divine master level. There were also many heavenly Dao divine arrays listed in it. Of course, if Zhuan wanted to continue breaking through in the future, he would naturally need to find higher grade books. Let's go, follow behind me. After putting away the alchemy book with satisfaction, Zhuan waved at Fire Plume and Steel Plume and directly entered the abyss. Hey, you're going in just like that? Aren't you afraid of death? Fire Plume asked in horror. Just follow me. If you don't believe me, then don't come in. After saying that, Zhuan plunged into the abyss. The green-haired mummy and blood scale naturally followed without hesitation. Fire Plume's expression was uncertain, but in the end, she still followed behind Zhuan. However, Fire Plume and Steel Plume were extremely cautious and kept a distance from Zhuan. They knew that an extremely terrifying force would appear about 1,000 meters deep in the abyss. At that time, she wanted to see how Zhuan would block that terrifying force. Soon, the group entered 1,000 meters deep into the abyss. The instant Zhuan entered the 1,000-meter radius, he felt that vast power form a terrifying pressure that squeezed his entire body. It was as if his entire body was going to be flattened. Just as Zhuan couldn't bear the pressure and was about to be annihilated by it, the Pango banner in his divine soul emitted an invisible ripple. Then, an inexplicable vacuum formed around Zhuan. Zhuan heaved a sigh of relief. It seemed that the green-haired mummy was right. The Pango banner was indeed able to restrain this terrifying force. The green-haired mummy and blood scale also entered Zhuan's side. After seeing that Zhuan and the other two were safe and sound, Fire Plume was first shocked, then she heaved a sigh of relief and followed Zhuan. Then, the group went deeper into the abyss. Half a day later, they found a black whirlpool at the bottom. This whirlpool was formed by rotating in the void. It was like a deep black mouth that could swallow everything in the world. Let's go in, the green-haired mummy said. Zhuan and the others didn't hesitate and immediately entered the whirlpool. Zhuan only felt that the world was spinning, then he lost consciousness. When Zhuan woke up, he found that he was in a natural cave. At the front of the cave was an extremely magnificent bronze gate. Countless strange beasts were carved on the bronze gate, and these strange beasts were worshipping the 12 statues at the top of the gate. Zhuan was no stranger to one of the 12 statues. It was Zhurong, one of the 12 ancestors of sorcerers. After fusing with the Zhurong Gu, he was naturally no stranger to Zhurong's image. Since Zhurong appeared among the 12 statues, they should be the statues of the 12 ancestors of sorcerers. Zhuan looked around and found that the green-haired mummy, blood scale, and the other 3 were not here. He knew that after entering the black whirlpool, they should have been transmitted to this place separately. This should be the place of origin. What a strange place. It looks like an ordinary cave, but why does it give me a feeling of being in a vast starry sky? Zhuan muttered in a low voice and came in front of the bronze gate. The bronze gate was so big that Zhuan was like an ant in front of it. Moreover, the bronze gate was tightly shut, and Zhuowen's divine sense was blocked by the gate. Zhuan tried to push the bronze gate, but found that it was like an ant trying to shake a tree. The Panga banner is moving. Just as Zhuowen was sighing dejectedly, the Panga banner in his divine soul suddenly stirred. Chapter 2664. A Bountiful Harvest Creek. With a gentle wave of the Panga banner, the originally motionless bronze door slowly opened to both sides. The moment the bronze door opened a crack, Zhuowen went in, and the Panga banner returned to Zhuowen's spirit. However, a path inexplicably appeared in Zhuowen's mind. At the end of this path, there was a stone floating on an altar. Zhuowen knew that this was the image sent to him by the Panga banner. It should be that the Panga banner needed this stone, but he didn't know what it was. Something that the Panga banner was thinking about was definitely not a simple stone. This origin ground should be related to Pangu. Otherwise, the Panga banner wouldn't be so excited. Zhuowen quietly pondered for a while, then followed the path given to him by the Panga banner and walked forward. This was a huge natural square. On both sides of the square, there were rather rough stone sculptures. These stone sculptures were extremely ancient. There were old and young, men and women. Some of them were holding ancient bamboo slips and reading seriously. Some were looking up at the sky with their hands behind their backs. Some were wearing armor and looked heroic. Moreover, Zhuowen found that behind each stone sculpture, there was a secret door. Of course, these secret doors were very hidden. If Zhuowen didn't get the path given to him by the Panga banner, he wouldn't have been able to see them. There were more than 30 secret doors here. The moment Zhuowen opened the first secret door, he was immediately stunned. Because inside this secret door, there were actually all divine medicines with astonishing medicinal effects. Moreover, these divine medicines were all Tao-proving divine medicines. Most of them were heavenly Tao divine medicines, and a few were primordial Tao divine medicines. After opening the second secret door, Zhuowen was even more shocked. This was because this secret door also contained divine medicines. Furthermore, the divine medicines were of a higher grade than the first secret door. They were all primordial Tao level divine medicines, and there were even a small number of primordial chaos level divine medicines mixed in. Zhuowen opened one secret door after another and found that each secret door contained a corresponding Tao-proving divine medicine. Of course, there were high and low levels of divine medicines in the secret doors. Zhuowen even found a second step Tao-proving divine medicine in one of the secret doors. This is, when Zhuowen opened the last secret door, he was stunned. There was only one divine medicine in this secret door, but its medicinal efficacy was much more powerful than all the other secret doors he had found before. This was a very ordinary stalk of grass, but this stalk of grass contained a terrifying medicinal power. This medicinal power formed a powerful current that flowed upwards like a countercurrent. As the medicinal power flowed, Zhuowen seemed to see an illusory world within the flowing medicinal power. This is definitely a divine medicine that is beyond the second step Tao-proving divine medicine. Zhuowen guessed in his heart, but he had already pounced forward to grab the divine grass and put it into his spirit ring. At first, this divine medicine sensed that Zhuowen wanted to escape. However, because of the aura of the Panga banner on Zhuowen's body, the divine medicine was suppressed and Zhuowen easily caught it. If other cultivators had come, they would not have been able to catch this divine medicine at all. After all, this divine medicine had a spirit and its ability to escape was unparalleled. Unfortunately, it had met Zhuowen, who had the Panga banner. Zhuowen could not suppress the excitement in his heart. He had never thought that he would be able to obtain so many divine medicines at once. Moreover, each of them was of such a high level. If the outside world knew that Zhuowen had obtained a divine medicine, it would definitely cause a stir among countless forces and cause many forces to arrest Zhuowen. Not to mention that Zhuowen had first step and second step Tao-proving divine medicines. Just the fact that Zhuowen had obtained a third step Tao-proving divine medicine was enough to cause an unprecedented sensation. It was enough to alarm the Xianmi Heaven Domain's Tao Palace forces. Of course, Zhuowen would not leak these things unless he had a death wish. As expected of the place of origin, there are so many divine medicines. Zhuowen left the square with excitement in his heart. Now, he found that the route given to him by the Panga banner was the best one. He basically did not encounter any obstacles or terrifying traps along the way. The whole way was unimpeded, and every time he arrived at a place, he would discover more or less. A Heavenly Tao Origin Crystal Mine? And it's a special class Heavenly Tao Origin Crystal Mine. When Zhuan accidentally dug up a Heavenly Tao Origin Crystal Mine, he was completely stunned. It was not that he had never obtained special class Heavenly Tao Origin crystals before, but when he saw an entire special class Heavenly Tao Origin Crystal Mine, even Zhuowen, who had a strong heart, was dumbfounded. It should be known that ordinary first-step Tao validation cultivators could not even take out a special class Heavenly Tao Origin crystal, let alone an entire special class Heavenly Tao Origin Crystal Mine. The value of this special class Heavenly Tao Origin Crystal Mine was probably comparable to that of a Tao Palace faction. After storing a large pile of special class Heavenly Tao Origin crystals, Zhuan found that his spirit ring was almost full. Only then did he stop collecting special class Heavenly Tao Origin crystals. With reluctance, Zhuan could only leave the special class Heavenly Tao Origin Crystal Mine and continue forward. Finally, Zhuan arrived at the end of the route. It was a huge altar. The entire altar was square, tens of thousands of square meters in size. The altar was made of white jade. At the front of the altar stood a sundial. Behind the sundial was an altar with 10,000 steps. At the top of the altar was a large bronze cauldron. Above the cauldron floated a very ordinary stone. This stone was almost exactly the same as an ordinary stone. The only difference was that the surface of this stone was engraved with complicated patterns. Moreover, Zhuan found that these patterns were like the pulse of a human body. They were pulsating on the surface of the stone, emitting a 7-colored light with every pulse. What kind of stone is this? Zhuan looked at the strange stone above the cauldron in shock. He was extremely shocked. The Panga banner in Zhuowen's divine soul suddenly became agitated. Then, it started to sway in his divine soul like a lively child. "You want that stone?" Zhuowen asked subconsciously. However, after realizing that this Panga banner was not alive, he laughed at himself in his heart. But he soon found that the Panga banner in his spirit actually nodded like a human. Zhuan thought for a while and finally walked to the top of the altar. When he arrived in front of the main hall, the first thing he looked at was not the stone above the cauldron, but the sundial at the front. The sundial was tilted 45 degrees, facing the altar. Zhuan found that the thin black needles on the sundial were spinning rapidly. Moreover, they were spinning faster and faster. It was as if time was flying at this moment. Chapter 2665. Profound meaning in the image. There was a vast and boundless starry sky. This starry sky was cold and lonely, without any stars. Zhuan knew that this should be the initial starry sky when Pangu had just split open the chaos. In the center of this starry sky, there was a huge figure that stretched as far as the eye could see. It was Pangu. Pangu's body was collapsing. His essence blood turned into 12 beams of bloody light and shot in all directions. His primordial spirit turned into 3 beams of green light and escaped into the void. Pangu's flesh and blood spilled in all directions, turning into sparkling stars that filled the sky. Among the countless stars, Zhuan saw a stone shoot out of Pangu's heart. This stone emitted a 7-colored light. Is that Pangu's heart? Zhuan guessed. The image came to an abrupt end when the 7-colored stone shot out of Gu Xian's mouth. Zhuan tried to touch the 7-colored stone with his hand, but he was bounced back by an invisible force when he was 1 foot away. After several attempts, Zhuan gave up on this method. Instead, he controlled the Panga banner to approach the 7-colored stone. Although he could not fully control the Panga banner, it was not difficult for him to move it. The moment the Panga banner approached the 7-colored stone, the 7-colored lines on the stone's surface shot into the Panga banner like rainbow-colored veins. The Panga banner emitted a strange buzzing sound. Zhuan clearly felt the joy of the Panga banner from this buzzing sound. 2 hours later, the 7-colored lines on the 7-colored stone in front of the Panga banner completely dimmed, then turned into countless fine powder. Zhuan knew that all the energy of this stone should be condensed in the 7 colored lines on its surface. When all the energy of the lines was absorbed by the Panga banner, this stone was no different from an ordinary stone. This is, after completely absorbing the energy of the 7 colored stone, Zhuan found that the wide surface of the Panga banner had changed a lot. Originally, the banner should have drawn the image of Pangu holding the heaven-splitting double axes. Now, Zhuan found 4 words at the 4 corners of Panga's image. The 4 words at the 4 corners of the banner were break, erect, prohibit, and destroy. The image of Pangu seemed to have materialized, much clearer than before. Also, Zhuan found that the image of Pangu on the banner was more vivid and full of spirituality than before. For example, if the previous image of Pangu was an ordinary black and white painting, then the current image of Pangu's image of Pangu was a colorful painting with additional colors. Profound? The moment the 4 words appeared on the banner, a corresponding message appeared in the depths of Zhuo Wen's mind. This message introduced the meaning of the 4 words. From the information in his mind, Zhuo Wen knew that the 4 words represented the 4 powerful profound meanings contained in the Panga banner. They were created by Pangu when he was born. Among the 4 profound meanings, the break profound meaning was the sky-splitting blade. The erect profound meaning was the creation mysterious light. The prohibit profound meaning was the infinite primordial chaos. And the destroy profound meaning was the death of heaven and earth. These 4 profound meanings all had the power to destroy heaven and earth, and they could only be displayed through the Panga banner. Moreover, the 4 profound meanings had completely different abilities. For example, the sky-splitting blade was the break profound meaning, which could tear the chaos, split time and space, and open up the infinite world. The create mysterious light was the erect profound meaning, which could be divided into yin and yang, the 5 elements, and give birth to the infinite earth, water, fire, and wind. The infinite primordial chaos was the restrict profound meaning, which could create chaos, cover up the universe, and create the infinite chaotic world. The death of heaven and earth was the destroy profound meaning, which could destroy heaven and earth, ancient and modern, and destroy countless worlds. Zhuan thought for a moment and roughly understood the functions and effects of these 4 profound meanings. However, Zhuan also knew that it was still a little difficult for him to use the 4 great profundities. Of course, Zhuan also knew that once these 4 profound meanings were successfully displayed, their power would definitely be extraordinary. Moreover, Zhuan was most surprised by the Panga banner's materialized image of Pangu. He knew that the Panga banner's biggest gain after absorbing the colorful stone was not the 4 profound meanings, but the materialized image of Pangu. From the message transmitted by the Panga banner, he knew that the Pangu pattern was actually the Pangu shadow, the ultimate profound meaning of the Panga banner. It was said that as long as one could activate the power of the Panga banner, they could summon the Pangu shadow and display the supreme power of Pangu. However, this profound meaning was the ultimate profound meaning of the Panga banner, and the requirements were extremely harsh. At the very least, one had to have a 7-star Pangu sacred body to be qualified to display it. If one's strength did not reach the 7-star Pangu sacred body, it was said that if one forcibly displayed the ultimate profound meaning of the Pangu shadow, one's body and soul would be destroyed. As for the other 4 profound meanings, the requirements were relatively lax. As long as one could condense the Pangu sacred body, they would be qualified to display the profound meanings. Moreover, as the Pangu sacred body became stronger, the power of the 4 profound meanings would also become stronger. Now that he had activated these 4 profound meanings, whether it was his original body or his doppelganger, as long as he had the Panga banner in his hand, he could use them. Of course, the ultimate profound meaning of the Pangu shadow could only be displayed after he condensed a Pangu sacred body and reached the 7-star Pangu sacred body. Boom! Boom! Suddenly, an ear-piercing roar came from the passage north of the altar. Zhuo Wen's eyes flickered, and he jumped down and rushed to the north. As soon as he entered the passage, Zhuo Wen found that there were countless black shadows flashing in the passage. Every black shadow had a pair of blood-red eyes, which were staring at Zhuo Wen greedily. Zhuan spread out his divine sense and recognized the true faces of these black shadows. They were bats, half the size of a man, hanging upside down in the air above the passage. Now that Zhuan had suddenly entered the passage, he immediately awakened these bats. Then, the passage was filled with the sound of flapping wings. Then, these bats roared and rushed toward Zhuan, trying to devour him. Zhuan snorted coldly and immediately drew his sacrificial death sword. Blade after blade of death light flashed and slammed into the bodies of the countless bats in the surroundings. Sizzle! 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 The bats were all blown away by the sacrifice of death sword. However, what made Zhuan frown was that these strange bats had thick skin. The sacrifice of death sword did not cause much damage to them. Zhuan's attack had naturally angered this group of bats. These bats let out even more ear-piercing roars. The sound waves were like ripples, gathering in Zhuan's ears. Even Zhuan felt an extremely uncomfortable buzzing sound in his ears. It was as if countless drums were beating next to his ears. Zhuan snorted, and his powerful divine sense burst out like ripples. He immediately used the soul kill. Then, Zhuan was surprised to find that the huge bats around him were like mice that had encountered a cat. They let out sounds of horror and all fell to the ground. Chapter 2666. Flaming Batsuan looked at this scene strangely and soon realized that it was his spiritual sense that caused all this. To be more precise, it was the aura of the Panga banner in his spirit. After his spirit was transformed by the Panga banner, every time he used his spiritual sense, it would carry the ancient aura of the Panga banner. These bats were not afraid of Zhuan's powerful spiritual sense, but the ancient aura carried by Zhuan's spiritual sense. After figuring out this connection, Zhuan used his spiritual sense to form a veil that covered the surface of his body. Then, like a gust of wind, he rushed into the depths of the passage. Although he could kill all the bats here if he continued to use soul kill, it would consume a lot of his energy. Moreover, his spiritual sense found that there were more bats in this passage than the ones in front of him. There were more ahead. If he had to kill them one by one, how long would it take? Along the way, these strange bats were afraid of Zhuan's spiritual sense. Although many of them were ready to attack, none of them dared to come forward. About an hour later, Zhuan arrived at the place where the sound came from. Immediately, he found that what appeared in front of him was a huge open space. At the center of this open space was a large magma pool with an extremely high temperature. Endless waves of heat surged over like scorching tornadoes. Above the magma pool was a huge flaming bat, flapping a pair of huge flame wings on its back. This flaming bat was much larger than the bats Zhuan had encountered along the way. It was about 30 meters in length. In particular, the aura emitted by this flaming bat was really terrifying. Zhuan was sure that this flaming bat at least had the strength of primordial chaos lord. At this moment, in front of the flaming bat, two figures were struggling to resist the attacks of the flaming bat. These two figures were not unfamiliar to Zhuan. They were Fire Plume and Steel Plume. Boom! Boom! The flaming bat let out a shrill cry, and countless streams of lava turned into surging streams that poured down in front of Fire Feather and Steel Feather. Poochie! Fire Plume, who was holding a red feather fan, was at the end of her rope. Now that she was hit by the stream of magma, she could not hold on any longer. She spat out a mouthful of blood and was sent flying backward, landing not far away. Seeing this, Steel Plume roared and his whole body erupted with a metallic luster. His originally huge body expanded several times, and he quickly waved his fists. Countless fist shadows set off a terrifying storm of Taoist rhyme. The terrifying stream of magma was blasted into countless magma droplets by the fist shadows. Steel Feather, on the other hand, used the recoil to continuously retreat. In the process of retreating, he pulled Fire Feather and retreated together. Steel Plumes, the flaming bat Hughes Fire Plume is me Fire Bat. The flaming bat roared at the sky, flapped its wings, and disappeared like a bolt of lightning. When it reappeared, it was already above Steel Plume and Fire Plume. Countless flames erupted from the flaming bat's body, forming an extremely solid flaming prison that enveloped Steel Plume and Fire Plume. Moreover, the flaming prison erupted with terrifying flames, like an endless rain of fire, surrounding Fire Plume and Steel Plume. The flaming bat's flaming energy was extremely special and powerful. Even if Steel Plume used all his strength, he could only barely protect himself and Fire Plume. Zhuan silently watched this scene. He could feel that the flaming bat was not to be trifled with, especially in this predicament. If Steel Plume and Fire Plume did not have a stronger trump card, the two of them would undoubtedly die. Steel Plume and Fire Plume's eyes were filled with despair. They had already used all their trump cards, but they were still no match for the flaming bat. They knew very well that when Steel Plume could not hold on, it would be their death. At the same time, Fire Plume and Steel Plume also noticed Zhuan, who had just appeared. However, the despair in their eyes did not diminish in the slightest. In their opinion, Zhuan's strength was on par with Steel Plume's. Even if the two of them joined forces, they were no match for the flaming bat. Zhuan's arrival was just another death sentence. The flaming bat glanced at Zhuan, who was not far away, with a human-like look of contempt, as if it was looking at an ant. It continued to leisurely control its flames to attack Fire Plume and Steel Plume. In the flaming bat's opinion, the human who had just appeared was simply courting death. It was not in a hurry to make a move. It planned to deal with the two ants in front of it first. Zhuan narrowed his eyes. He realized that a dense swarm of bats had unknowingly gathered behind him. These bats stared coldly at Zhuan with their scarlet eyes and blocked Zhuan's path. Zhuan sneered in his heart. He knew what the flaming bat was planning. Unfortunately, if the flaming bat knew that he had the Panga banner in his spirit, it would not be so careless. Well, you'd better leave quickly. You'll just lose your life if you stay. Fire Plume's voice rang in Zhuan's mind. Zhuan looked at the Fire Plume in the Cheongsam. He thought that Fire Plume had sent him a voice transmission to ask him to help them. He did not expect that Fire Plume wanted him to leave. Soul kill! Zhuan took a step forward, and his powerful divine sense turned into a hurricane that swept out. Instantly, the bats behind him that were eyeing him covetously were affected by this divine sense, and they kept squeaking as they fell to the ground, twitching and struggling. Zhuan shot out like an arrow from a bow and headed directly for the flaming bat. When the flaming bat saw that Zhuan had actually blown away the swarm of bats with a single blow, its originally careless gaze suddenly became much more serious. The flaming bat opened its mouth and spat out a stream of flames that turned into countless spirals and shot toward Zhuan. Zhuan coldly snorted and immediately used the slaughtering Dao finger. Countless heavenly energy converged into a huge finger that crossed the sky and landed on the spirals of flames. However, what made Zhuan's face turn gloomy was that when the slaughtering Dao finger blasted on the spirals of flames, it only caused the spirals of flames to stagnate for a moment before they collapsed. The slaughtering Dao finger was Zhuan's strongest technique at present. However, it only caused the spirals of flames to stagnate for a moment before they collapsed. It could be seen that the strength of the flaming bat was far beyond Zhuan's imagination. Soul kill! Zhuan quickly retreated. At the same time, he used the soul kill and blasted it directly toward the flaming bat. Originally, the flaming bat wanted to follow up with another attack. However, when it felt the ancient aura of Zhuan's soul kill, it let out a sharp cry. Its body trembled, and it involuntarily took a few steps back. Zhuan's consciousness attack did not have much effect on the flaming bat. The main thing that affected it was the ancient aura contained in the consciousness. Chapter 2667. Annihilate bang, 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 bang. The moment the flaming bat was frightened by the aura of the Panga banner, Zhuan's eyes lit up. He took a step forward and 3 sword lights appeared from his body. The 3 sword lights were the Blood Immortal Sword, the Thunderfire Sword, and the Death Sacrifice Sword. The 3 divine swords turned into 3 different directions and easily pierced the flaming bat's vital points before it could react. The flaming bat was furious. The energy around its body swirled and blew away the 3 divine swords that had pierced its body. However, one could feel that the flaming bat was heavily injured. After all, he had aimed at the bat's 3 vital points. The wounds that were pierced by the divine swords were bleeding profusely, causing the flaming bat's movements to become much slower. A flaming hurricane swept out. Immediately, the flaming bat ignored Fire Plume and Steel Plume and attacked Zhuan with all its might. Zhuan frowned slightly. He tried his best to activate his consciousness and use the soul kill. He wanted to use the aura of the Panga banner to suppress the flaming bat. The flaming bat was indeed affected by the soul kill, and its movements were a lot slower. However, this fellow's strength was not something ordinary bats could compare to. It actually withstood the suppression of the aura and charged toward Zhuan. This guy is finished. Fire Plume, who had just broken free from the flaming prison, almost collapsed to the ground. Fortunately, Steel Plume caught him. He could not help but shake his head and smile bitterly when he saw the flaming bat rushing toward Zhuan. Steel Plume's eyes flickered. Although he also wanted to help, resisting the flaming bat had consumed too much of his strength. He had no ability to stop the flaming bat, which was now in a berserk state. Moreover, the flaming bat was too fast. Even if he took action now, he would not be able to catch up. Zhuan, on the other hand, was much calmer. The 4 great mysteries that the Panga banner had transmitted to him kept echoing in his mind. His eyes revealed a look of enlightenment. These 4 profound meanings had been deeply imprinted in Zhuan's mind under the effect of the Panga banner. It was just that he had encountered such a situation before he tried to release the profound meanings. Now that they were in such a dangerous situation, Zhuan became even calmer. The 4 great profound meanings kept flashing through his mind. Just as the flaming bat was about to approach Zhuan suddenly moved. Zhuan slowly raised his right hand and waved it casually. The moment he waved his right hand emitted an intense golden light that could not be looked at directly. Although this golden light was only a small part of Zhuan's hand blade, the golden light it emitted was earth-shattering and contained an extremely terrifying power. Puchi! Zhuan's karate chop landed lightly on the flaming bat. The karate chop ignored the flame defense in front of the flaming bat and went straight through. It then landed heavily on the flaming bat's body. The flaming bat screamed at the sky. Then, countless cracks appeared on its body. Dazzling golden light burst out from the cracks. In the end, the flaming bat was completely enveloped by the golden light and was annihilated into nothingness. The moment the flaming bat was annihilated, Fire Plume and Steel Plume were stunned on the spot, unable to say a word. Zhuan, on the other hand, was pleasantly surprised. Just now, when the flaming bat attacked, he used the profound meaning of destruction to create a chi blade. The final effect surprised Zhuan. The chi blade was too terrifying. It destroyed the flaming bat with just one blow. Moreover, he knew very well that the real chi blade was extremely huge. It was said that it had the power to split the sky. Zhuan was only at the beginner level. However, even if he was only at the beginner level, the chi blade that Zhuan used was so terrifying that it made people tremble. It actually destroyed the flaming bat with one blow. However, Zhuan soon felt an intense sense of fatigue in his body. He almost couldn't stand steadily. This caused Zhuan to be secretly shocked at the terrifying consumption of the sky-splitting blade. Zhuan quickly took out a pill that could restore essence from the spirit ring. After swallowing it, he felt that the weakness in his body had recovered a little. Zhuan's eyes were filled with shock as he thought to himself, "Isn't this profound a little too taxing on me? If it weren't for the fact that I didn't fully unleash the sky-splitting blade, I'm afraid I would have been exhausted to death by the sky-splitting blade." Just now, Zhuan had used up most of the energy in his body with just one blow. Zhuan couldn't imagine that if he had used the second blow, he would have been done for. At the same time, he also had a deeper understanding of the power of the 4 profound meanings in the Panga banner. At the very least, if he used these profound meanings, it shouldn't be a problem for him to kill an existence at the level of Lord Hunyuan. Steel Plume and Fire Plume had already come back to their senses. Fire Plume directly came in front of Zhuan and pointed her slender finger at Zhuan. She trembled and said, How did you do it?" Steel Plume stood behind Fire Plume and looked at Zhuan with a complicated expression. He originally thought that Zhuan's strength was at most on par with his. However, the process of Zhuan using his strength to kill the flaming bat had shocked him too much. He also knew that the white-clothed youth in front of him was stronger than him. However, Steel Plume couldn't imagine how the white-clothed youth in front of him could be so powerful when he was only at the life and death extremities. In Steel Plume's opinion, even the peerless geniuses of Dao Palace forces wouldn't be able to kill a flaming bat at the level of Lord Hunyuan while at the life and death extremities. This simply defied common sense. However, the white-clothed youth in front of them had done it. Moreover, he had killed a flaming bat at the level of Lord Hunyuan right under their noses. Zhuan came back to his senses and looked at Fire Plume indifferently. He said, "Oh, I just casually waved my hand and the bat was destroyed. It's that simple." Fire Plume's face flushed red. She said in exasperation, "How can it be that simple? This monster almost killed Steel Plume. You're only at the life and death extremities. How can you be a match for this flaming bat? I don't believe that you killed this flaming bat. It must be some expert hiding in the dark." Zhuan frowned slightly. He felt that Fire Plume was too competitive. However, he didn't mind. He said, "If that's what you think, then so be it." Seeing Zhuan's indifferent attitude, Fire Plume was furious. She stomped her foot and was about to speak again when Steel Plume stopped her. Brother Zhua, I'm really sorry. Our young miss was too agitated and lost her mind. Please don't take it to heart." Chapter 2668. Pocket World. How did you get here after entering the origin grounds? Zhuan asked casually. After Steel Plume explained, Zhuan learned that Fire Plume and Steel Plume had also appeared in front of a bronze door after being sucked in by the vortex. However, the bronze door they were in wasn't tightly shut, but was open. However, after entering the bronze door, they had encountered many dangers. They had encountered many terrifying traps, and if not for their vigilance, they would have died long ago. Moreover, if not for Zhuowen's arrival, the two of them would have died without a doubt. Brother Zhua, thank you for saving our lives this time. We discovered a high-class heavenly law origin crystal vein ahead, and we are willing to share it with you, Brother Zhua. Steel Plume cupped his fists toward Zhuan. Fire Plume's expression changed slightly, but when she remembered that Zhuan was their savior, she didn't raise any objections even though she was unwilling. Zhuan didn't mind. He had discovered a special-class heavenly law origin crystal, and his spirit ring was almost filled to the brim with special-class heavenly law origin crystals. It was normal for him to not care about high-class heavenly law origin crystals. A heavenly law origin crystal vein is too big. I don't think we can take it away with just the few of us. Moreover, the heavenly law of the heavenly law origin crystal vein is too powerful. Even if the spirit ring has so much space, the spirit ring itself can't withstand the terrifying heavenly law of the heavenly law origin crystal vein, Zhuan said casually. When Zhuan discovered the special class heavenly law origin crystal vein, he originally wanted to uproot it and store it in the Devourer King's space. However, he discovered that although the Devouring King's space was massive, it did not possess the power of laws of a true world. Due to the lack of power of laws, if he recklessly placed a special-grade heavenly law origin crystal vein into the Devouring King's space, the space might not be able to withstand it and might even collapse. However, the space in the spirit ring was small and could only store a small amount of special-grade heavenly Dao origin crystals. The heavenly Dao laws contained in this small amount of special-grade heavenly Dao origin crystals were not too terrifying. However, the heavenly Dao law of the entire mine was too terrifying. Although the Devourer King's space was huge, it wasn't a real world. It didn't have the corresponding heavenly Dao law. Previously, Yin had felt that something was wrong. This was also the reason why Zhuan did not use the Devourer King's space to store the ore vein. What Zhuan was surprised about was what kind of space Steel Feather and Fire Feather had. Not only could it withstand the powerful heavenly Dao laws of the heavenly Dao origin crystal vein, but it was also large enough to carry the entire vein. Steel Plume and Fire Plume exchanged glances, then looked at Zhuan strangely and said in unison, "Although the heavenly law origin crystal vein is large, it is still possible to uproot it. There is a corresponding container in the Xianmi heavenly domain that can store the heavenly law origin crystal vein." Zhuan was startled. Immediately after, he looked at Fire Plume and Steel Plume in disbelief and asked subconsciously, "How? The ore vein is so big that the spirit ring can't possibly store it, right?" Steel Plume smiled and said, "Indeed, the spirit ring can't store it, but the miniature world can. In the Shenmi heavenly domain, the disciples of the major forces all have miniature worlds. These miniature worlds are very large, the size of a planet. Moreover, they also have corresponding world laws, which are not much different from a real world. They can withstand the heavenly Tao laws of the heavenly Tao origin crystal vein. Moreover, the miniature worlds of some superpower houses have all kinds of powerful world laws. Every step they take is filled with killing intent. In these miniature worlds, they can do whatever they want." Zhuan revealed a strange look. This was the first time he had heard of a miniature world. He had never heard of such a thing in the 8 heavenly domains. Only the higher-level Xianmi heavenly domain could create such a strange miniature world. If one had a miniature world, they could indeed store an entire ore vein without fearing the backlash of the heavenly Tao laws of the heavenly Tao origin crystal vein. Zhuan had obtained the Devourer King's clone for a long time. He only knew that the Devourer King's internal space was huge, but he didn't know how to use it, let alone how to form world laws in the Devourer King's internal space. Now that Zhuan was enlightened by the miniature world, he couldn't help but wonder if the Devourer King's internal space could also form various world laws and become a real starry sky world. Although there were many stars in the Devourer King's internal space, these stars were still external. The world laws in these stars had been in the internal space for a long time. The world laws in these stars seemed to have dissipated, no different from the void around the internal space. Zhuan looked at the dim stars in his internal space and sighed in relief. He was glad that he didn't keep the Ziwei galaxy and the Ryuka race in his internal space. With the dissipated world laws in the Devourer King's internal space, it would be difficult for him to cultivate to the 9 steps void sky steps. It would be wishful thinking if he wanted to prove his Tao in the internal space. Thinking about the Ryuka race, Zhuan revealed a look of nostalgia. Back then, the Ryuka race was still developing in the far west of the Great Brahma domain. When Zhuan returned to the Great Brahma domain, too many things happened. He didn't have the time to see how the Ryuka race was doing. When he returned to the Great Brahma domain, he planned to head to the far west to bring the Ryuka race back and bring them to the Shenmi heavenly domain. How about this? I only want 10% of the high-grade heavenly Tao origin crystal vein, but can you give me a miniature world? Zhuan cupped his fists towards Fire Plume and Steel Plume. Zhuan was extremely curious about the miniature world. Perhaps he could get some inspiration from the miniature world and improve the Devourer King's internal space. At that time, Zhuan could even transform the internal space in the Devourer King's internal space into a real starry sky. At that time, it wouldn't be like a pool of stagnant water like it was now. Fire Plume and Steel Plume frowned. They only had 2 miniature worlds on them. Even with their wealth, a miniature world was extremely precious. However, Zhuan had saved their lives. Moreover, he only wanted 10% of the high-grade heavenly Tao origin crystal vein. After all, if it weren't for Zhuan, they wouldn't be alive right now. Brother Zhua, this is my miniature world. Take it. Steel Plume made a prompt decision. He immediately took out a ring and handed it to Zhuan. This ring was similar to a spirit ring, but its appearance was more simple. If one didn't look carefully, they would think that it was a spirit ring. However, when Zhuan took the ring and probed it with his divine sense, he felt a strong aura of vitality. Then, he found that there was a world with distinct heaven and earth inside the ring, as if he was on a huge planet. Zhou couldn't be more familiar with the Devourer King's internal space. This time, he had obtained a small world filled with laws. Comparing the 2 different worlds, Zhuo immediately became enlightened and entered a state of epiphany. Although it had only been 3 days, Zhuo felt like 3 years had passed during this period of enlightenment. During this period of enlightenment, he had completely deduced the entire process of Devourer King's internal space evolving into a great world filled with laws. It was precisely because he had deduced the true great world during that moment of enlightenment that Zhuo Wen's array Dao level had also undergone a complete transformation in that instant. He had naturally advanced to become a heavenly Dao array Dao master. The moment Zhuo opened his eyes, he saw Fire Plume and Steel Plume looking at him with complicated expressions. "Brother Zhuo, follow me to the ore vein." Steel Plume calmed down and said. Zhuo shook his head and said, "You guys go first. When the time comes, just leave behind 10% of the ore vein. I still have other things to do." Steel Plume and Fire Plume didn't suspect anything. They cupped their fists at Zhuo and left. Zhuo also returned the way he came and arrived at the place where he found the special grade Heavenly Dao Origin Crystal. Zhuo Wen didn't immediately take action. Instead, he used his divine sense to follow the entrance of the mine and continuously extend it until he reached the end of the mine. Only then did he discover that this mine was extremely long. Even though his divine sense was powerful enough, he could still barely reach the end of the mine. Zhuo took a deep breath. His eyes were filled with fanaticism and excitement. He knew that the value of this ore vein had far exceeded his expectations. Although he had already deduced the direction of the Devourer King's internal space evolving into a major world, he knew that it would take time to completely transform it into a major world. Right now, he could only use the minor world he obtained from Steel Plume. Moreover, he also knew that as long as the Devourer King's internal space successfully transformed, it would surpass any minor world in the Xianmi heavenly region. Moreover, from the Devourer King's memories, it seemed that the previous Devourer Kings had never tried to transform their internal space into a major world. This was an unprecedented attempt. I must uproot this ore vein and store it in my minor world. Zhuo Wen came back to his senses. Soon after, his power surged into his divine sense. At the same time, he continuously used his soul kill power. Borrowing the power of his divine sense, he formed a huge net-like object. Then he began to slowly pull the load. Boom, boom, boom. While the ore vein was being pulled, the entire passage began to tremble violently. At the same time, ear-piercing rumbling sounds could be heard. Zhuo's expression remained calm. He forcefully activated his divine sense. Immediately, the trembling around him became even more intense. At the same time, the head of the ore vein began to be slowly pulled out. 3 days later, Zhuo's forehead was covered in sweat. He had finally pulled out the entire special-grade Heavenly Law Origin Crystal vein and barely managed to store it in his minor world. Looking at the mountain-like special-grade Heavenly Law Origin Crystal vein in his minor world, Zhuo revealed an excited smile. With so many special-grade Heavenly Law Origin Crystal veins in his possession, Zhuo knew that he could establish an incomparably powerful force. Even if he didn't establish a force, he wouldn't have to worry about not having enough resources for his cultivation in the future. After putting away the ore vein, Zhuo sent a message to Fire Plume and Steel Plume. After receiving their location, Zhuo rushed towards Fire Plume and Steel Plume. Fire Plume and Steel Plume were currently in a mountain range. The two of them had already excavated all the special-grade Heavenly Law Origin Crystal veins. Seeing Zhuo come over, Steel Plume did not hesitate to cut off 10% of the ore vein and handed it over to Zhuo. Zhuo did not refuse. After putting the 10% of the ore vein into his minor world, he looked around and said, "There are still many unknown places in the Origin Land, but this place is also full of unknown dangers. Do the two of you still plan to go deeper?" Zhuo knew very well that the Origin Land was very large, but he also knew that the most important thing in this place was the Stone of Origin. Now that he had obtained the Stone of Origin as well as many resources, he did not plan to stay any longer. Fire Plume and Steel Plume also understood Zhuo's meaning and shook their heads, not intending to continue exploring. Chapter 2670. The 9-storied pagoda. At least they were already very satisfied. Now that they knew the entrance to the Origin grounds, they could explore it again in the future. There was no need to go deeper now. After all, they had personally experienced the dangers here. "Let's go. I know the route to the exit. Just follow me," Zhuo said as he took the lead and rushed forward. The route given by the Panga banner not only included the route to enter the origin grounds, but also the route to leave. Although Fire Plume and Steel Plume were puzzled, they had no choice but to believe in Jun. "Brother Joie, were your two friends?" Steel Plume asked along the way. Juan's heart sank. He shook his head and said, "I've already sent a message to them, but I didn't get a reply." Originally, Juan and Bloodscale had a master-servant contract, so they could sense each other to a certain extent. However, after Juan obtained the Origin Stone, the connection between him and Bloodscale suddenly disappeared. This meant that Bloodscale had died, or that someone had taken the initiative to remove the master-servant contract. If anyone had the ability to remove the connection, Juan felt that it should be the green-haired mummy. Of course, Bloodscale was also very likely to have died in the origin grounds. After all, Bloodscale's strength was far from recovered. It was very normal for him to encounter danger in the origin grounds and die. As Juan followed the route given by the Panga banner and approached the destination, he suddenly realized that something was wrong. To be more precise, he realized that the moment he arrived at the destination, there was a huge discrepancy between the information given to him by the Panga banner. According to the information given by the Panga banner, there should be a transmission array at the end of the route. Moreover, the location was remote and extremely inconspicuous. When Juan arrived at the destination, what he saw was not a remote corner, but a huge open space. In the middle of this open space stood a huge tower that was impossible to reach. The tower was surrounded by a dense demonic aura. It was purple-black in color, as if it was real. It was swimming around the tower like fish. The tower had 9 floors, and each floor had 9 windows. In the dim light of every window, there seemed to be a figure hanging there. Juan stopped in his tracks. He looked at the 9-storied pagoda in front of him with a bewildered expression. What is this? What a dense demonic aura. This thing doesn't belong to the human race at all. Fire Plume's beautiful eyes were filled with shock as she looked at the 9-story pagoda in front of her. Although Steel Plume didn't say anything, it was clear from his serious expression that Steel Plume was no less shocked than Fire Plume. Juan's eyes were gloomy. His divine sense passed through the tower's windows, and when it reached inside, he found that there were corpses hanging from each window. Moreover, none of the corpses belonged to the human race. Some of them had the body of a lion, the head of an ox, the tail of a snake, the head of a dog, the body of a human, the winged man, and so on. Moreover, the corpses that appeared in the 9-story pagoda all exuded an aura that made Juan tremble with fear. Juan could not imagine how terrifying and powerful these corpses were when they were alive to possess such a powerful aura even after death. Juan soon noticed the top floor of the pagoda. At the top of the pagoda, Juan found 2 figures slowly crawling towards the top of the pagoda. Juan was no stranger to these 2 figures. They were the green-haired mummy and Bloodscale. The moment he saw Bloodscale, Juan's pupils shrank. He knew that Bloodscale had completely broken off their master-servant relationship. As for why the master-servant contract on Bloodscale was broken, it probably had something to do with the green-haired mummy. The moment he discovered these 2 people, Juan also discovered that there was a round bead emitting a faint blue light inlaid on the top of the pagoda. The light in this dark space was all emitted from this round bead. The faint blue light emitted a strange aura and sound, giving people a sense of coldness. Juan could tell at a glance that this round bead was extraordinary. He also faintly felt that this round bead had an inseparable connection with the pagoda. Once this round bead was taken away, something terrible would happen to the pagoda. Thinking of this, Juan jumped up and rushed towards the top of the pagoda. However, the moment he reached the top of the pagoda, he felt an unprecedented gravity crushing his body, causing him to fall down involuntarily. Juan finally understood why the green-haired mummy and Bloodscale wanted to climb up the pagoda. The gravity was too strong. Even if Juan used all his skills, he couldn't rely on his divine power to fly up. He could only climb up like a mortal. The 2 of you, don't touch that round bead. With no other choice, Juan could only shout loudly, hoping to stop the 2 corpses from approaching the bead. The green-haired mummy and Bloodscale paused for a moment and looked down at Juan. Then they turned around and continued climbing. Zhuowen's face was gloomy. He knew that the green-haired mummy should know the origin of this pagoda. Moreover, this guy should have come to the origin grounds for this pagoda. Although Zhuowen wanted to stop the two, he knew that he couldn't make it in time. He could only watch as the green-haired mummy walked to the top of the pagoda and reached out to take down the round bead. The moment the round bead was taken down, the temperature of the entire space suddenly dropped. A dull atmosphere filled the air, as if the surrounding atmosphere was suddenly suppressed by some invisible force. Zhuowen's face changed drastically. He quickly pulled Fire Plume and Steel Plume back. The green-haired mummy at the top of the pagoda grabbed Blood Scale and threw him away. Then, Zhuowen saw Blood Scale scream and explode into a cloud of blood mist. The green-haired mummy took advantage of the moment when Blood Scale exploded into a cloud of blood mist. Then, it completely left the pagoda and rushed into the darkness behind the pagoda. Soon it disappeared. Zhuowen looked at the green-haired mummy that had already disappeared and cursed in his heart. He was sure that Blood Scale was used by the green-haired mummy as a scapegoat in the end. However, Zhuowen didn't have so many thoughts. Instead, he focused on the 9-story pagoda in front of him. Ever since the bead was taken down from the top of the tower, Zhuowen clearly felt that the surrounding atmosphere had become much more oppressive. It was as if something invisible was pressing down on his heart, causing his heart to beat faster and he to feel suffocated. It was as if a terrifying force was about to be released by this 9-story pagoda. Then, a heart-palpitating roar erupted from the 9-story pagoda. Chapter 2671. Chapter 2671. Isis, let's go. Zhuowen didn't dare to stay any longer. The uneasiness in his heart urged him to leave this place immediately. Therefore, he immediately regained his senses and pulled Steel Plume and Fire Plume towards the passage behind them. He knew that the darkness behind the 9-story pagoda, which was the direction the green-haired corpse had gone, should be the exit to the land of origin. However, he didn't dare to approach the 9-story pagoda. He was afraid that once he got close to the pagoda, he might not be able to return. Fortunately, the Panga banner didn't only give him one exit. There was still another one. However, it was said that the teleportation array at this exit was somewhat damaged, and the teleportation effect would be slightly different. It could be said that the teleportation array was risky. However, compared to the terrifying 9-story pagoda, Zhuowen felt that this little risk was still acceptable. As Zhuowen continued to flee, Zhuowen discovered that the roars behind him were getting sharper and more terrifying. Every time the roars reached his ears, they seemed to be able to shake his soul, causing it to tremble. Fire Plume and Steel Plume also reacted and followed closely behind Zhuowen. Hearing the terrifying roars behind them with lingering fear, they asked, "Brother Zhuo, what exactly is that 9-story pagoda behind us? It seems like some terrifying existence has been born inside." Zhuowen shook his head and said uneasily, "I don't know what it is either. However, I know that it's definitely an inauspicious thing inside. Now that the bead that sealed this inauspicious thing has been taken away, the thing inside should be coming out soon. We can't fight it, otherwise, we'll die a horrible death." Fire Plume and Steel Plume nodded repeatedly. Although they hadn't come into contact with the existence inside the 9-story pagoda, they could tell from the terrifying roars that the thing inside was definitely not something they could deal with. Zhuowen was already cursing the green-haired corpse in his heart. If he had known that this green-furred corpse was here to cause trouble, he wouldn't have allowed it to follow him. Now, this guy had entered the land of origin and released an unknown powerful creature. This was a trap for him. "Brother Zhuo, the exit should be behind the 9-story pagoda, right? If we go back now, won't we be trapped inside?" Fire Plume was extremely intelligent. She quickly recalled the direction that the green-furred corpse had fled in and revealed a worried expression. "Don't worry, I know of another exit, but the teleportation array at that exit isn't complete. The teleportation might not be very effective, so," Zhuowen said, "we can only try our best now." Steel Plume smiled bitterly. Zhuowen nodded and remained silent. Boom, boom. Suddenly, a thunderous sound came from behind. Zhuowen's expression changed slightly. He grabbed Fire Plume and Steel Plume and threw out a punch. The full power of the two-star Pangu's sacred body was unleashed. Boom! The fist force collided with the astral wind behind him. Zhuowen's expression suddenly changed. The astral wind was so terrifying that it made Zhuowen feel as small as a mortal facing a towering mountain. Zhuowen then spat out a mouthful of blood. He immediately grabbed Fire Plume and Steel Plume and kept retreating. They continued to flee into the depths of the land of origin. Zhuowen didn't even have time to see what had attacked him. After throwing out a punch, he only thought of running away. He had a hunch that once the unknown thing behind him caught up, it would be difficult for him to escape. Fortunately, after Zhuowen threw out a punch, the unknown thing behind him seemed to be afraid of the power of Zhuowen's Pangu's sacred body. It didn't chase too closely and followed closely behind Zhuowen. In the process of escaping, Zhuowen immediately swallowed a healing elixir. However, he didn't stop or slow down at all. He was afraid that if he slowed down, the thing behind him would catch up. Fire Plume and Steel Plume were already scared out of their wits. Although Steel Plume was strong, he could feel that the thing behind him was much stronger than them. He didn't have the courage to fight at all. Zhuowen only dared to attack because he felt that the Pangu's sacred body had a restraining effect on the thing behind him. That was why Zhuowen dared to attack. However, Zhuowen neglected the fact that the thing behind him was so powerful. Even if the thing was afraid of Zhuowen's Pangu's sacred body, it could still seriously injure Zhuowen. Zhuowen no longer dared to stop and fight with the thing behind him. Instead, he ran desperately. Soon, Zhuowen followed the route in his mind and came to another exit. It was an extremely remote stone room. The stone room even looked a little dilapidated. It was obvious that no one had used it for a long time. On the floor of the stone room, there was an extremely complicated magic array. This magic array was a teleportation array. However, there was a hole in the upper left corner of the teleportation array. The hole was very small. If one didn't look carefully, they wouldn't be able to see it. Obviously, this teleportation array had a flaw. Although it was very small, it had a great impact on the teleportation effect. Zhuowen's face was a little ugly. He was a divine array master, so he had a much deeper understanding of teleportation arrays than ordinary people. The teleportation array was the most complicated and rigorous magic array. There was absolutely no room for any flaws. Even a small flaw would cause irreparable consequences. It would have a profound impact on the teleportation effect. There was a small hole in the teleportation array in front of him. Zhuowen knew that even if it could be activated, there would be a big problem with the teleportation. The biggest problem was that he might be crushed into pieces by the space-time during the teleportation process before he could be teleported out. However, he had no choice now. The thing behind him was getting closer and closer. He couldn't afford to waste too much time. I can only fight with my life on the line. Zhuowen sighed. He immediately took out a supreme-grade God Stone and placed it on the teleportation array. He immediately activated the teleportation array. Blazing light spread around the teleportation array. Then, the teleportation array enveloped Zhuowen, Fire Plume, and Steel Plume. With a flash of light, the three of them disappeared on the spot. At the same time, the stone room was blasted to pieces. A huge black shadow that was over 30 meters tall charged in from the outside. This black shadow had scarlet eyes. It had a lion's body and a human face. Its huge palms slammed into the ground, causing the ground to tremble as if there was an earthquake. If Zhuowen was here, he would definitely recognize this monster with a lion's body and a human face. Wasn't it one of the 81 corpses in the 9-story tower? In the cold, starry sky, an invisible ripple appeared. Then a figure appeared out of thin air. Chapter 2672. Eastern Emperorty, the land of origin still suppresses the corpses of the 99 great sorcerers. These poor great sorcerers were all legendary figures in the world before they died, but after they died, they were refined into a 9-story demon tower and suppressed by the demon pearl forever. But now this demon pearl is mine. With this demon pearl, I can recover half of my strength. When I go to the untainted heavenly realm, I will teach those ignorant juniors a lesson. 12 great sorcerers? I will take care of the untainted heavenly realm in the future. When I take control of the untainted heavenly realm, I will attack the Shenmi heavenly realm and destroy the scum of the human race. The green-haired mummy laughed and disappeared. As for Jun, the green-haired mummy thought he was dead for sure. Although it was a pity that Jun had the Panga banner, the mummy's strength was not enough now. If he went in again, he might not be able to get out. At the former site of the Six Desires heavenly domain, in the sealed land that led to the Eldritch heavenly domain, a bald man in a loose robe was forming a seal with his hands. Mysterious lines flew out from his palms and landed on the sealed land. The light of the lines gradually disappeared, and the bald man looked at the seal he had cast with satisfaction. He smiled slightly and said, "With my lifetime of array Dao, unless someone at the third step of Dao confirmation comes, they won't be able to break this seal." The bald man admired the seal in front of him with satisfaction. Then, he turned his head and looked at the distant starry sky. A stream of light came from the distant starry sky. It was extremely fast and soon landed in the bald man's palm. It was a glittering flying sword. A flying sword message? The third prince is here too? And he is in the great Brahma heavenly realm. The bald man put away the flying sword message and frowned slightly. The bald man was Master Yuan Hui, the eternal level formation master sent by the Huangji family in the Xianmi heavenly realm. A divine array master of this level, even in the Xianmi heavenly domain, was a highly regarded existence. Even Dao Palace level forces had to be respectful to such an existence and did not dare to slight them. The third prince mentioned by Master Yuan Hui was the third son of the head of the Huangji family. The bald man frowned because the third prince was truly a hedonistic son of a wealthy family. Although the third prince's talent was indeed very good, he did not like to cultivate. What he did every day was to seek pleasure and pleasure in front of him. Even so, the third prince's cultivation base had been nurtured by the rich resources of the Huangji family, so he had successfully attained the Dao and become a Dao Yuan master. Of course, a Dao Yuan master like the third prince, who relied on resources to forcefully advance, was naturally much weaker than an ordinary Dao Yuan master. However, the third prince had the support of the Huangji aristocratic family. Usually, he did not need to do anything in a battle. The experts sent by the Huangji aristocratic family would help him settle it. Forget it, the matter of the seal has been resolved. Let's go take a look at the third prince. Perhaps he might bring us some news from the Huangji family? It would be best if you have specific information about the land of origin. Master Yuan Hui shook his head, put away the flying sword, and left the place. Not long after Master Yuan Hui left, the green-haired mummy came to a place not far from the seal. When the green-haired mummy saw the seal that led to the Eldritch heavenly realm, he frowned and said coldly, "Someone actually strengthened the seal here. Fortunately, it's only an eternal level seal. If it's a seal that surpasses the eternal level, I'm afraid I won't be able to go to the Eldritch heavenly realm." The green-haired mummy did not immediately break the seal. He was not good at seals. He found a remote meteorite near the seal, opened up a cave, and planned to go into seclusion. He planned to absorb all the energy of the demon pearl. After his strength recovered to a certain extent, he would forcibly break the seal here. The blue earth was now shrouded in a huge demonic aura. An incomparably huge pagoda appeared in the Kunlun mountain range of earth. This huge pagoda covered the sky and floated above the earth, causing countless creatures on the earth to panic. However, other than emitting a horrifying roar, the huge tower did not launch any attacks. Even so, the extremely massive demonic aura had affected countless living beings on Earth. This huge pagoda floated above the Earth for about 3 days, then broke through the sky and left. Wherever this huge pagoda passed, a terrifying demonic aura filled the air. In a short time, the entire Huaxia heavenly realm was shrouded in demonic aura. The creatures affected by the demonic aura gradually found that their physical strength was constantly increasing. Whether it was mortals or cultivators, they could clearly feel the changes in their physiques. However, some people also found that their minds were becoming more and more blurred while their physiques were changing. Cultivators were better off as their willpower was stronger, so they could still retain their rationality. However, some mortals were completely affected by the demonic aura and lost their rationality. But as the demonic aura became denser, cultivators were also gradually affected by it. They lost their rationality and became monsters that only knew how to kill. Moreover, these monsters that had lost their rationality were in awe and fear of the 9-story pagoda floating in the Huaxia heavenly realm. As long as it was an order from the celestial wizard corpse in the 9-story pagoda, these monsters would not resist. Outside the Huaxia heavenly realm, Yuan barely managed to stabilize his body. His face was pale, but his eyes were staring blankly at the scene in front of him. The entire Huaxia heavenly realm is controlled by that 9-story pagoda? What the hell is that? Zhuan was in disbelief. Fire Plume and Steel Plume also appeared behind Zhuan in a sorry state. The two of them also looked at the Huaxia heavenly realm that was shrouded in demonic aura and could not be seen clearly. Is that the legendary demonic pagoda in the land of origin? Is it the demonic pagoda that was refined by the legendary great wizard Dong Huangtai? Fire Plume said in shock. Dong Huangtai? Zhuan looked at Fire Plume in confusion. Fire Plume calmed down and said calmly, ever since Pangu created the universe and turned it into the starry sky, we entered the desolate era. In that era, there were hundreds of races, but only 3 races were the most powerful. These 3 races are the human race, the wizard race, and the monster race. The human race and the wizard race fought and split the desolate heavenly realm, which became the Xianmi heavenly realm. Although the wizard race was weakened during the conflict with the human race, they are still in charge of the desolate heavenly realm. Only the monster race disappeared during that conflict. However, I once heard that the monster race once had a shocking genius named Dong Huangtai. This Dong Huangtai was extremely daring. He secretly collected the corpses of great wizards in the desolate era and refined them into corpse puppets. He collected them into his natal demonic artifact, the 9-story pagoda. Chapter 2673. Rage Fire Plume let out a sigh. Brother Zhua, if I'm not wrong, there should be a great monster like the Eastern Emperor Tai Yi slumbering in the land of origin. Now that the green-furred corpse has taken the demonic pearl, the Eastern Emperor Tai Yi has awakened. I'm afraid that the Eastern Emperor Tai Yi is planning to revive the monster race with the 8 heavens as his base. Zhuo Wen's heart trembled. He had seen the terror of one of the corpse puppets in the 9-floor tower. He was no match for it. Not to mention that there were 81 corpse puppets in the 9-floor tower, and there was the even more terrifying Eastern Emperor Tai. Zhuo Wen knew that he was no match for the Eastern Emperor Tai Yi. He would be sending himself to his death. It won't be long before the 8 heavens turn into a monster realm. Adding on the fact that the great desolate heavenly realm is eyeing us, we can't stay here any longer. Brother Zhua, why don't you come with us to the Xianmi heavenly realm? Steel Plume persuaded. That's the only thing we can do now. I can only rely on the 2 of you to go to the heavenly moat. Zhuo cupped his fists. Fire Plume and Steel Plume naturally agreed. Zhuo had saved them twice and Zhuo was very strong. His talent must be terrifying. If he went with them to the heavenly moat, they would have the chance to invite Zhuo to join their purple-red house. At that time, their purple-red house would have a chance to rise again. Zhuo took a final look at the Huaxia heavenly realm that had turned into a monster realm. He had a feeling that the 8 heavens would be in chaos soon. He had to return to the great Brahma heavenly realm immediately and bring Chen Shui and his friends away from this place. Amidst the rolling demonic qi, the 9-story tower floated quietly. Inside the tower, a man in a black robe sat cross-legged. His entire body was wrapped in black cloth, and only a pair of bright eyes could be seen. I've finally awakened. I, the Eastern Emperor Tai Yi, will revive the monster race. Also, where did the person who woke me up come from? He has an aura that is even more ancient than mine. Forget it, forget it. Although the demonic pearl is very important to me, since it was this person who woke me up, then there's no harm in taking the demonic pearl as a reward. Dong Huangtai closed his eyes again and activated the 9-storied pagoda, spreading it toward the other heavens. The 8 heavens had long been his territory. When he woke up, it would be time to transform this place. At that time, he would turn this place into a demon realm and make it his territory. Once the demon domain was formed, Dong Huangtai would have the capital to fight against the Xianmi heavenly domain and the prehistoric heavenly domain. At that time, he would not have to be chased out of the prehistoric heavenly domain like a stray dog. As for Jun and the others, they were like ants in his eyes. Since he had not killed them previously, he naturally would not make a move to hunt down ant-like fellows. Jun worked day and night and finally arrived at the borders of the Great Brahma region. However, Jun felt extremely uneasy in his heart. This was because after he had sent a message to Mu Chenxue, he had not received any response from Mu Chenxue. Jun had even sent a message to Tong Chimei, Magatama, Yuezu, and the others, but there was no response. This made Jun have a faint premonition. When Jun arrived near the Wenshui Palace, he found that the stone statue that everyone had built had collapsed. The Wenshui Palace, which was originally bustling with noise and excitement, had become extremely deserted. What happened? Fire Plume looked at the deserted surroundings and her beautiful eyes were also filled with surprise. Big Brother Zhuo. Suddenly, a soft cry attracted Zhuowen's attention. He saw that in a dilapidated meteorite not far from the Wenshui Palace, a figure covered in black cloth was looking in Zhuowen's direction. Zhuowen landed beside the figure and realized that the figure covered in black cloth was Tong Chimei. When Zhuowen was about to speak, he was pulled by Tong Chimei. Then, they flew away from the Wenshui Palace. However, their path was quickly blocked by 2 figures. How dare you! His Majesty the Crown Prince has already instructed that without his permission, no one is allowed to come near here. You are simply... One of the 2 figures was a thin and tall man. His voice was a little sharp. However, before he could finish his words, he stared blankly at the white-clothed youth beside Tong Chimei. He could not finish his words. The moment Zhuowen saw the 2 people in front of him, killing intent surged in his eyes. Because these 2 people were 2 of the 20 heavenly Dao masters who had submitted to him back then. These 2 people were already his servants, yet they still dared to berate his people like this. They had nothing to fear. You are courting death. Zhuowen snorted coldly and immediately communicated with his mind, intending to destroy their souls. However, Zhuowen quickly realized that although he communicated with his mind, the 2 people in front of him were safe and sound. His Majesty the Crown Prince was right. The slave contract that this person placed on us is no longer effective. Quickly inform His Majesty the Crown Prince. The thin and tall man was ecstatic. He immediately took out a talisman and crushed it. Then, the 2 of them immediately retreated, not daring to get too close to Zhuowen. At that time, Zhuowen had single-handedly fought more than 40 heavenly Dao masters. What kind of grace was that? Until now, it was deeply imprinted in their memories. They did not dare to fight such an expert head-on. Zhuowen's eyes were filled with killing intent. He immediately took out the sacrificial death sword. His powerful consciousness even executed the soul kill, causing the 2 people's minds to go blank for a moment. Then, the sacrificial death sword instantly pierced through their foreheads and destroyed their souls. Big Brother Zhuo, let's run. It will be too late if we don't leave now. After Zhuowen killed the 2 heavenly Dao masters, Tong Chimei did not show the slightest bit of joy. Instead, she was deeply worried and urged Zhuowen to leave. Zhuowen placed his right hand on Tong Chimei's shoulder. When he wanted to calm her down, his expression changed drastically, and he removed the veil on Tong Chimei's face. Tong Chimei cried out in shock. Unfortunately, her hand was not as fast as Zhuowen's. After the black veil fell, a face covered in scars appeared in front of Zhuowen's eyes. Although Tong Chimei could not be considered beautiful, she had a heroic spirit, and her appearance was even better. However, Tong Chimei's heroic face no longer existed. Instead, it was replaced by an ugly face covered in scars. Moreover, Yun could sense that the scars on Tong Chimei's face contained the aura of the Tao. With Tong Chimei's strength, it was impossible for her to heal the scars. Clearly, someone had intentionally left the scars on Tong Chimei's face. Chimei, who did this? The anger in Zhuowen's heart could not be contained. To a woman, appearance was the most important thing. It was the same for cultivators. Now, Tong Chimei's appearance was ruined. Zhuan even found that the divine power in Tong Chimei's body was so weak that it was negligible. He knew that Tong Chimei's cultivation had also been destroyed. Chapter 2674. Huangji family. Tong Chimei quickly lowered her head, not daring to look at Zhuan. She secretly wiped her tears and said, "Big brother Zhuo, let's go. The prince that those two were talking about is not someone we can afford to offend. They are too strong." Fire Plume and Steel Plume followed behind Zhuan. When they heard Tong Chimei's words, they seemed to have thought of something and their expressions changed. Fire Plume quickly asked, "Miss Tong, the prince you mentioned, could it be the prince of the Huangji family?" Tong Chimei nodded and said, "Yes. When that prince came, he said that he was the third prince of the Huangji family. Moreover, the people around the third prince are too strong. I heard that there is a bodyguard of the Master of Destiny, who is already a powerhouse in the second step of the Tao confirming realm. He is an existence that can cover the sky with one hand." Fire Plume and Steel Plume's expressions changed. They never thought that the third prince of the Huangji family would also come here. This fellow was a famous playboy in the host region. Moreover, he was ruthless and cynical. Moreover, this fellow had a terrifying powerhouse like the Master of Destiny by his side. This kind of powerhouse could kill them as easily as flipping his hand. "Brother Zhuo, we have to leave this place quickly. The third prince of the Huangji family is not someone we can afford to offend." Fire Plume quickly said. Zhuan took a deep breath and ignored Fire Plume. Instead, he looked at Tong Chimei and said, "Chimei, where is Qin Shui?" Tong Chimei's expression changed and she said with a bit of disappointment, "When the third prince came to the Great Brahma region, he was fine and didn't make any big movements. However, elder sister Qin Shui had just broken through and a phoenix phenomenon appeared. Then the third prince muttered about the phoenix bloodline, so he captured elder sister Qin Shui." "Geji." Zhuan clenched his fist and said 3 words in a row. However, the killing intent in his eyes became even stronger. She actually possesses the phoenix bloodline. Furthermore, after breaking through, she was able to produce a phoenix vision. If the phoenix people of the primitive heaven domain were to find out about this, they would probably worship her as a goddess, Fire Plume said with a strange look in her eyes. Zhuan did not think too much about the phoenix people that Fire Plume mentioned. He looked at Tong Chimei and asked, "Chimei, where is Qin Shui right now?" In this prince's golden house. A mere ant actually has the right to show such anger to this crown prince?" An untimely voice sounded. Soon after, Zhuowen's group was surrounded by over a dozen figures. At the front of the encirclement, a man dressed in a golden threaded robe was sitting on a splendid carriage, flying through the air. The 2 drivers in front of the carriage were 2 white-haired old men. However, from the light in their eyes, it could be seen that these 2 old men were not simple people. Zhuan could tell with a single glance that these 2 old men should be at the primordial Chaos Lord level. As for the people around them, they were the people that Zhuan had subdued in the past. The man sitting in the carriage was naturally the Huangji family's third prince, Huang Zhe that Fire Plume had mentioned. In the carriage, Huang Zhe casually picked up a grape beside him and put it into his mouth. He completely ignored Zhuan and looked at Tong Chimei who was beside Zhuan. Zhuan's aura was too weak. He was only in the life and death boundary. This kind of cultivation was like an ant in Huang Zhe's eyes. He was too lazy to even spare him a glance. "Little beauty, how did you escape when I wasn't paying attention? I still have many methods that I haven't used on you yet. Do you hate me that much? Once I'm hated, I'll lose my mind. At that time, I don't know what I'll do to you." Huang Zhe looked at Tong Chimei with a teasing look in his eyes. His voice was even more unrestrained. Tong Chimei trembled in fear. She clearly remembered the scene of her falling into Huang Zhe's hands. Zhuan coldly looked at Huang Zhe and said, "Qin Shui is in your hands? And the scar on Chimei's body was also caused by you?" Huang Zhe indifferently glanced at Zhuan. Then he waved his hand and said, "All of you attack. This ant is too noisy." Kill him to shut him up. Swoosh swoosh swoosh. Although those people were a little afraid of Zhuowen, they were more afraid of Huang Zhe. After all, Huang Zhe's fierce reputation was out there. As people from the Eastern Path region of the Xianmi Heavenly Domain, they had naturally heard of him. Compared to Zhuowen, they were even more unwilling to offend Huang Zhe. Zhuowen took a step forward. The Thunder Fire Sword, Blood Immortal Sword, and Death Sacrifice Sword swept out at the same time. They turned into 3 streams of light that constantly danced. At this moment, Zhuowen did not hold back at all. The 3 heavenly Tao-grade divine swords were like weapons of death. Every time they danced, they would reap a life. Soon, those people were all killed by Zhuowen. Huang Zhe narrowed his eyes and finally glanced at Zhuowen. He said, "An ant at the life and death boundary can actually kill a heavenly Tao master. It seems like your talent is not bad. How about this? I'll give you a chance. Kneel before me and be my dog, and I won't kill you today. Moreover, I'll even give you a chance to enter the Huangji clan and let you have a great fortune." Huang Zhe glanced at Zhuowen from above. It was as if having Zhuowen become his dog was a great honor for Zhuowen. Fire Plume frowned. She felt that Huang Zhe's words were too arrogant. In her opinion, a genius like Zhuowen needed to be taken seriously even if he entered a Tao Palace level force. This Huang Zhe actually wanted him to be a dog. He was too arrogant. However, Fire Plume did not dare to refute Huang Zhe. After all, he had 2 primordial chaos experts protecting him. Moreover, he had the Huangji clan behind him. Fire Plume did not dare to say anything. Huang Zhe did not mind Zhuowen's silence. He looked at Fire Plume and Steel Plume and said indifferently, "Fire Plume from the Purple Red House?" Fire Plume did not dare to be negligent. She cupped her hands and said, "Yes." "The 2 of you are in cahoots with this ant?" Huang Zhe asked casually. However, there was a trace of killing intent and hostility in Huang Zhe's words. Fire Plume and Steel Plume naturally felt the hostility in Huang Zhe's tone. They could imagine that if they said that they were with Zhuowen, Huang Zhe would not let them off easily. Zhuowen looked coldly at Fire Plume and Steel Plume. In his opinion, Fire Plume and Steel Plume would not admit to being with him. After all, the force behind Huang Zhe was too strong. Fire Plume and Steel Plume would not take such a risk. However, to Zhuowen's surprise, Fire Plume openly admitted to being with him and even pleaded with Huang Zhe. "Crown Prince Huang Zhe, Zhuowen is a disciple of our Purple Red House. He did not know your identity just now. I hope you won't forgive him. We will immediately take him away from here," Fire Plume said in a neither servile nor overbearing tone. Steel Plume's eyes flashed with worry, but he did not say anything. He knew that Fire Plume had already made up her mind. There was no point in him saying anything. Huang Zhe said coldly. Elder Bai nodded slightly and shouted softly. He took a step forward, surrounded by Taoist rhymes, and blasted out another claw. The power of Elder Bai's claw was far stronger than before. Obviously, Elder Bai had not exerted all his strength just now. The peak of Lord of Primordial Chaos, Steel Plume looked solemn. After Elder Bai exerted all his strength, he finally knew that Elder Bai's cultivation realm was at the peak of Lord of Primordial Chaos. It could be said that Elder Bai was far stronger than the ordinary Lord of Primordial Chaos. He was a little worried about whether Zhuowen could deal with Elder Bai. Back then, the Flaming Bat's strength was also at Lord of Primordial Chaos, but it was not at the peak of Lord of Primordial Chaos. It was just a beast and did not have so many means like a cultivator. Now, Elder Bai was a knowledgeable cultivator and his means were much stronger than the Flaming Bat's. Moreover, he was at the peak of Lord of Primordial Chaos, which was much stronger than the Flaming Bat's. Zhuowen's eyes narrowed slightly. He obviously also discovered that Elder Bai was at the peak of Lord of Primordial Chaos. At the same time, Zhuowen's attention was fixed on the other old man beside Huang Zhe. He knew that this old man should also be at the peak of Lord of Primordial Chaos. Apart from these 2 old men, Zhuowen did not find the Destiny Master expert mentioned by Tong Qimei around Huang Zhe. Obviously, that expert might have something to do and was not here. Zhuowen was very confident in his spiritual consciousness. Even if the Heaven's Mandate Master was hiding in the surroundings, his spiritual consciousness would still be able to see everything clearly. Since he could not find anything, it meant that the Heaven's Mandate Master was not around. In other words, as long as he could kill the two guards beside Huang Zhe who were at the peak of Lord of Primordial Chaos, Huang Zhe would have nothing to rely on. Zhuowen knew very well that with his current 2-star Pangu's sacred body, he could at most tangle with Elder Bai. It was unrealistic to kill Elder Bai, who was at the peak of Lord of Primordial Chaos, unless he used the profound meaning of the Pangu banner. However, he also knew that he only had one chance to use the profound meaning. If he killed Elder Bai, he would inevitably be exhausted. At that time, he would definitely die if he faced another expert at the peak of Lord of Primordial Chaos. Therefore, Zhuowen's plan was to let the two experts at the peak of Lord of Primordial Chaos join forces to deal with him. Then, he would use the profound meaning to kill them in one fell swoop. This was his only chance. If he failed, he was afraid that he would have to use the space-time key to teleport him into the space-time temple to escape Huang Zhe's killing move. Bang, bang, bang. In an instant, Elder Bai, who was wrapped in an even more terrifying power, fiercely collided with Zhuowen. Although Zhuowen's aura was not obvious, his 2-star Pangu's sacred body was extremely powerful and terrifying. Although Elder Bai suppressed Zhuowen, he could not defeat Zhuowen at all, let alone kill Zhuowen. The more Huang Zhe watched, the more he frowned. In the end, he looked impatiently at Zhuowen and Elder Bai, who were still tangling with each other. He looked at the gray-robed elder on the other side of the carriage and said, "Elder Wu, you also attack together and get rid of this ant as soon as possible." The other gray-robed elder nodded and took a step forward. Like a meteor, he directly hit Zhuowen. The powerful aura of the peak of Lord of Primordial Chaos was released unreservedly from his body. Huang Zhe, aren't you too despicable? How could you let two peak experts of Lord of Primordial Chaos join forces to deal with a cultivator in the two extremes of life and death? Fireplume could not help but scold. Huang Zhe coldly glanced at Fireplume and said, "Fireplume, even if your father was in front of me, he would not dare to scold me like this. I have changed my mind. When I get rid of this guy, you will be my slave for life. Even if I get tired of playing with you, you will not be able to leave my hand." Fireplume trembled with anger and fear. Huang Zhe was famous in the Eastern Path domain of the Xianmi Heavenly Domain for being a cruel playboy. If she really fell into his hands, she would suffer a fate worse than death. At this moment, the gray-robed elder, Elder Wu, had also joined the team besieging Zhuowen. The joint forces of the two peak experts of Lord of Primordial Chaos were so powerful that terrifying energy ripples appeared in the surrounding millions of miles of starry sky. Chapter 2676. SS Phoenix Bloodline Bang. Bang, bang. Old Bai and Old Wu took advantage of the gap and suddenly took a step forward. Their attacks poured down on Zhuowen's body. Zhuowen groaned and retreated continuously. He even spat out a mouthful of blood and his aura became extremely weak. Huang Zhe sneered and revealed a trace of cruelty when he saw this. Although the white-clothed young man was clearly only at the extremities of life and death, he was very surprised that he could fight against Master Hunyuan at the peak. Even he felt that such a genius was amazing. However, he also knew that a genius who had not been able to grow up was nothing. Didn't he still die without a burial ground under his orders? Thinking of this, Huang Zhe felt even more complacent. However, what happened next completely stunned Huang Zhe. Old Bai and the 5 elders, who had originally repelled Zhuowen and wanted to follow up with a victorious attack to completely eliminate Zhuowen with their next move, suddenly stopped when their attacks were about to land on Zhuowen. Then, the 2 old men screamed in horror and their bodies were cut in half by a blade of light. Moreover, the moment their bodies were cut in half, their bodies were annihilated into nothingness under the light of the blade of light. They completely disappeared before Huang Zhe's eyes. What's going on? Huang Zhe rubbed his eyes. Indeed, Old Bai and Old Wu had disappeared before his eyes just like that. He also discovered that the white-clothed young man Zhuowen's right hand was covered in a layer of blade of light. It was this arm covered in blade of light that had passed through the two old men's bodies and completely killed them in one go. Zhuan spat out a mouthful of blood and hurriedly took out several healing pills from his small world. At the same time, he took out a high-grade heavenly way origin crystal and circulated his meridians to absorb the energy of the crystal to recover the energy in his body. Earlier, he had been waiting for the moment when Old Bai and Old Wu attacked him together to use the profound Qi blade. The power of the profound Qi blade did not disappoint Zhuan. It easily killed Old Wu and Old Bai. However, it was extremely taxing on him. It was as if his body was completely drained. Waves of weakness assaulted his mind. Fortunately, he had many heavenly way origin crystals on him. When he used the sky-splitting blade earlier, he had used many high-grade heavenly way origin crystals to replenish himself. That was how he was able to kill Old Wu and Old Bai in a single strike. Steel Plume, Fire Plume, help me stall Huang Zhe. Yuan hadn't recovered from the moment he killed Old Wu and Old Bai. He had to kill Huang Zhe before he could react. Right now, he was too weak and did not have the strength to fight, so he could only ask for help from Steel Plume and Fire Plume. Steel Plume and Fire Plume also knew the severity of the situation. They knew that they had thoroughly offended Huang Zhe and were now on the same boat as Zhuan. They had to keep Huang Zhe alive. Otherwise, if Huang Zhe returned alive, they and the purple-red chamber behind them would be finished. After all, the Huangji family was too big and much stronger than the purple-red chamber. They could not afford to offend them. You dare! Huang Zhe looked at Steel Plume and Fire Plume who were blocking his way. His face changed slightly and he trembled with anger. Because Huang Zhe's cultivation was forcefully raised with resources and he did not have much combat experience, he was quickly subdued by Steel Plume. Even the spirit ring on his hand was taken away by Steel Plume. Brother Zhua, this is your spoil. Take it. Steel Plume took Huang Zhe's spirit ring and handed it to Zhuan. Zhuan nodded and accepted the spirit ring without hesitation. He was the one who killed Old Bai and Old Wu, so this spoil of war belonged to him. Therefore, he did not refuse. However, when he checked Huang Zhe's spirit ring, Zhuan sucked in a breath of cold air. He found that Huang Zhe's spirit ring also contained a miniature world. Moreover, Huang Zhe's miniature world was much bigger than the one given to him by Steel Plume. The laws inside were also much more complete and advanced. Zhuan even saw countless greenery in this miniature world. It was actually full of vitality. Zhuan did not hesitate to replace the miniature world given to him by Steel Plume. He then erased Huang Zhe's imprint on this miniature world and put Huang Zhe's spirit ring on his finger. Huang Zhe was extremely wealthy. Zhuan saw countless precious divine medicines and materials in Huang Zhe's miniature world. These divine medicines were much more than the ones he had seen before. Zhuan knew that these divine medicines were enough for him to join forces and advance to the primordial chaos level. After all, with so many divine medicines and the Emperor Pillfire's alchemy Dao comprehension, he would really be a pig if he couldn't advance to the primordial chaos level. Moreover, Zhuan also found that there were many top-notch escape talismans in Huang Zhe's miniature world. If Huang Zhe used these talismans, Zhuan might not be able to catch him. Obviously, Huang Zhe had no combat experience at all. After Old Wu and Old Bai were killed, he immediately panicked and didn't even think of taking out an escape talisman to escape. Of course, this also gave Zhuan the opportunity to capture this fellow. Otherwise, if Huang Zhe managed to escape, it would definitely be a huge disaster for them. How dare you? Why aren't you letting me go? Do you want to offend the Huangji family? Huang Zhe panicked and his voice was filled with panic. Since his debut, this was the first time he was caught in such a sorry state. Zhuan came over and slapped Huang Zhe, causing the latter to be stunned. Zhuan held Huang Zhe in one hand and said to Tong Qimei, "Qimei, do you know where Chen Shui is locked up?" Tong Qimei quickly said, "I know, but the place where elder sister Chen Shui is locked up has been sealed by the Master of Destiny. Bring me there first." Zhuan said. Tong Qimei nodded and brought Zhuan to the Wenshui Palace. After a while, Zhuan and the others arrived at Mu Chenshue's seclusion place. At this moment, Mu Qinshue's seclusion place had long been destroyed and turned into ruins. In the ruins, there were terrifying flames surging. The flames surged and formed an incomparably huge phoenix shadow. The phoenix shadow seemed to be real, and even the feathers on the phoenix's surface were clear as if they were real. Moreover, the fire phoenix's aura was extremely powerful, far more powerful than an ordinary master of heaven's path. Even an ordinary master of heaven's path might not be as powerful as the phoenix shadow. In the phoenix shadow, there was a beautiful figure sitting cross-legged. This beautiful figure was Mu Qinshu. At this moment, Mu Qinshu's Taoist rhymes were flowing around her body. Clearly, she had successfully become a master of heaven's path. Moreover, due to the special bloodline in her body, her aura was far from an ordinary master of heaven's path. It's indeed the phoenix bloodline. Moreover, it's such a powerful phoenix bloodline. If this woman enters the phoenix people's nirvana rebirth a few times, she might be even more heaven-defying. Chapter 2677. Zhou Zhuan came to the edge of the barrier and used the power of the Pangu's sacred body to strike the barrier. He couldn't help but take a few steps back as he looked at the barrier in shock. The power contained in the barrier was far above that of the Hunyuan master. It seemed that Tong Qimei was right. The barrier should have been set up by a Heaven's Mandate Master. Zhuan was glad that the Heaven's Mandate Master wasn't by Huang Zhe's side. Otherwise, he would have to fight with his life on the line. Although he still had the mysterious Ho Yi's divine arrow, he really wasn't sure if he could use it with his current strength. Even if he could use it, he would probably be half dead. How do I open this barrier? Zhuan asked coldly as he lifted Huang Zhe. Huang Zhe looked on coldly and sneered, I think you'd better surrender. Not to mention that you can't afford to offend the Huangji clan, you'll all die when Zoda returns. If you don't want to die, let me go and I won't pursue the disrespect you've shown me. Unfortunately, as soon as Huang Zhe finished speaking, Zhuowen twisted Huang Zhe's right arm and said coldly, I'm asking you how to break this barrier. Huang Zhe screamed in agony, his face pale as he looked at Zhuowen in disbelief. Zhuowen's eyes were cold. Before Huang Zhe could react, he broke Huang Zhe's left arm again. Huang Zhe's back was covered in cold sweat and his heart was filled with fear. The white-clothed youth in front of him was a madman. He didn't care about the Huangji clan behind him at all. When Zhuowen was about to cripple Huang Zhe's legs, Huang Zhe was so frightened that he immediately struggled and said, I can break this barrier, but you have to let me go. Zhuowen sneered and broke Huang Zhe's right leg. He said, What right do you have to talk terms with me? If you don't want to continue suffering, then open this barrier. Every time Zhuowen broke Huang Zhe's limbs, the pain would be magnified in Huang Zhe's soul, making Huang Zhe feel as if he was better off dead. Even those with strong willpower could faint from the pain, let alone this cowardly Huang Zhe. Sure enough, when Zhuowen was about to break Huang Zhe's left leg, Huang Zhe's tears flowed down his face as he quickly begged for mercy, indicating that he was willing to open the barrier. Only then did Zhuowen stop. Zhuowen threw Huang Zhe to the ground. The latter struggled to raise his head and mumbled something that Zhuowen could not understand. After a while, Zhuowen discovered that the barrier around Mu Qinshu was slowly disappearing. Inside the enchantment, Mu Qinshu seemed to feel that the enchantment around her had disappeared. The raging flames gradually converged and merged into her body. Husband. Mu Qinshu opened her eyes. She was pleasantly surprised to find that the person standing in front of her was the Zhuowen she had been thinking about day and night. Zhuowen gently stroked Mu Qinshue's hair and said, Qinshui, we have to leave this place quickly. Also, where are Xiangjuan, Yuezhu, and Magatama? Other than me, everyone else in Wenshui Palace was killed by Huang Zhe. Yuezhu and Magatama are no exception, but little sister Xiangjuan and Palace Master Jing Yun went to Xianmi Heavenly Domain with a force from Xianmi Heavenly Domain. Mu Qinshue's beautiful eyes dimmed. She quickly saw Tong Qimei not far away and quickly arrived in front of her. She held Tong Qimei's hands and said in a pleasantly surprised voice, Junior Sister Qimei, you're still here. This is great. But very quickly, Mu Qinshui discovered that something was wrong. Tong Qimei's cultivation had been crippled, and with her divine sense, she discovered that Tong Chimei's face was covered with many hideous scars. Was this done by Huang Zhe? Mu Qinshue's expression changed slightly and her beautiful eyes were filled with killing intent. Tong Chimei revealed a sorrowful expression. She only nodded silently. She knew that her cultivation had been crippled and her face was ruined. Her life was over. Zhuan summoned the space-time roulette and lifted the half-dead Huang Zhe. Let's leave this place first. This Huang Zhe still has a master of destiny's bodyguard. We need to leave before that bodyguard returns. Mu Qinshui withdrew her killing intent and nodded. She brought everyone into the space-time roulette. When Zhuan was about to activate the space-time roulette to leave, a strong sense of unease appeared in his heart. Zhuan shouted and immediately summoned the Thunder Fire Sword. He ordered Xiao He to control the space-time roulette to leave this place. Zhuan used all his might to activate the tyrannical Dao slaughtering technique. In the blink of an eye, he used the 3 moves of the slaughtering Dao finger, slaughtering Dao palm and slaughtering Dao hand. However, the moment these 3 moves were used, they were struck by an extremely powerful force. After a moment of stagnation, they completely collapsed and were annihilated. Zhuan made use of this time and immediately used the space-time rules to disappear from the original space-time. The space-time roulette had already broken through the air and left. Husband. Big brother Zhua. Before the people on the space-time roulette could react, they saw Zhuan being completely annihilated by a wave of energy. This power was simply too strong, causing them to not have the slightest thought of resisting. You guys leave first. This person should be Huang Zhe's master of destiny's bodyguard. It's useless for you guys to stay. Soon, Zhuowen's divine sense sounded in everyone's minds. Only then did they realize that Zhuan had unknowingly dodged the terrifying attack and appeared on the other side. However, Zhuan was too far away from them. Moreover, the Master of Destiny's aura had already locked onto Zhu. If Zhuan also entered the space-time roulette, it would be harming everyone. Everyone on the space-time roulette also realized this. Moreover, Zhuan had already given the order. They could only allow the space-time roulette to quickly break through the air and leave under Xiao He's control. After the space-time roulette left, a stream of light quickly came from another direction in the starry sky and landed not far from Zhuan. The man in front of him looked to be about 30 years old, but he had a head of white hair. He wore a loose robe, but it still could not hide his strong physique. Zode, you're finally here. Now that I'm about to be killed by this bastard, and my limbs are all crippled. This is all your fault. If my father finds out, I don't need to tell you what will happen to you, right? The moment Huang Zhe saw the white-haired man, he revealed a look of joy. However, he quickly scolded coldly. Zhuan could clearly see that after seeing the white-haired man, Huang Zhe's originally trembling body calmed down a lot. Obviously, Huang Zhe was very confident in this white-haired man. Zhuan sneered in his heart and mercilessly broke Huang Zhe's remaining left leg. Then Huang Zhe screamed again and again in fear, not daring to speak again. The white-haired man named Zode narrowed his eyes when he saw that Zhuan still dared to touch Huang Zhe in front of him, and killing intent flashed. Chapter 2678. Ho-Yi Divine Arrow. Zhuowen slowly retreated with Huang Zhe in his hand. He had consumed a lot of energy when he used the profound meaning to create the Qi blade. Although he had used the Heavenly Way origin crystal to recover a lot of his primordial Qi and had taken some healing elixirs, he knew that if he were to use the Qi blade again, he would be seriously injured even if he had a 2-star Pangu sacred body. Moreover, he doubted that in his current state, could he really defeat the white-haired man in front of him with the Qi blade? From the white-haired man, he could feel that the Destiny Master's strength was far above that of Hunyuan Master. To put it bluntly, even if Old Bai and Old Wu worked together, the white-haired man would probably be able to kill them in one move. Let go of the crown prince and leave your head behind. Zoda only spat out this sentence, but it was filled with an unquestionable command. Zhuan just stood there coldly. Facing Zoda's ferocious aura, he said indifferently, "What if I don't let go? Then die." After Zoda finished speaking, he took a step forward. His terrifying aura was extremely terrifying, as if the sky had collapsed. Soon after, Zoda suddenly punched out. The force in the air transformed into a powerful hurricane that actually enveloped Zhuo Wen's entire body. Zhuan immediately displayed the power of the Pangu's sacred body to protect himself from the raging energy. However, he soon realized that Zoda's target was not him, but Huang Zhe in his hand. Huang Zhe was directly blasted into a bloody mist. Before he died, Huang Zhe died with his eyes wide open and stared at the indifferent Zoda. He only had time to say, "Zoda," before he completely lost his life. Zoda withdrew his fist and was still indifferent. He looked disdainfully at Huang Zhe, who had turned into a bloody mist, and said indifferently, "You're just a playboy. Do you want me to obey your orders? Now that there's a scapegoat here, I'll just kill you. When the time comes, I'll just capture this scapegoat and report back." Zhuan hurriedly retreated. Looking at Huang Zhe, who had died in Zoda's hands, his pupils could not help but shrink. It had to be said that Zoda was really ruthless. He had actually killed his own master, Huang Zhe. However, he also knew that by killing Huang Zhe's words, it meant that Zhuan would be the scapegoat. So, Zoda was to kill Huang Zhe in house. It had to be said that Zoda was good. "Kill yourself in front of me." Zoda placed his hands behind his back and looked at Zhuo Wen with disdain. At the same time, he used the Devourer King's innate ability to devour. He began to madly devour the surging energy in the special-grade Heavenly Way Origin Crystal Mine. In just a single moment, he reached a balance between the absorption and release of the energy. Zhuan seemed to have become a transfer point for the energy. As the energy constantly flowed in, the evil spirit of the Hou Yi's divine arrow became even more terrifying. It seemed to stir up the sky, and a shocking killing intent locked onto Zoda. Zoda, who was originally unconcerned, felt his hair stand on end. He stared at Zhuo in disbelief. To be more precise, he was staring at the blood-stained horn in Zhuowen's hand. The killing intent that erupted from the ordinary horn that he did not care about actually made him shiver all over. He felt the true threat of death. Ever since Zoda had become a Heaven's Mandate Lord, this was the first time he had felt such terrifying killing intent. It was enough to make him feel the threat of death. Moreover, the killing intent was becoming more and more terrifying, to the point where he was terrified. Zoda wanted to leave immediately, but the killing intent from the blood-stained horn had locked onto him. He knew that no matter where he fled, the horn would be released and would hit him. It was only a matter of time. "Wait, Huang Zhe's death has nothing to do with you. I won't pursue the matter of you killing Huang Zhe. I'll leave right now. Put away this weapon," Zoda immediately said. Zhuan spat out a mouthful of blood. His eyes were cold, but his heart was filled with bitterness. He had no choice but to release the arrow now. Even if he wanted to stop it, he probably would not be able to. The Hou Yi's divine arrow was just too terrifying. If he did not release the arrow and it was stained with blood, he would probably be the one to die. Only now did Zhuan realize just how tyrannical the Hou Yi's divine arrow was. It was fine if he did not release it, but once it was released, it would definitely be stained with blood. "It seems like I have to ask them about the situation." Master Yuan Hui narrowed his eyes. Although he wasn't responsible for Huang Zhe's death, he was still in the 8 heavenly domains. Now that Huang Zhe was dead, he had to give the Huang Ji family an explanation. He couldn't just pretend that he didn't know anything and go back. With his status, the Huang Ji family wouldn't blame him too much. However, it was inevitable that the Huang Ji family would hold a grudge against him. Master Yuan Hui naturally wouldn't do that. "Let's find Fire Plume and Steel Plume first." Master Yuan Hui waved his sleeve and collected the auras of Fire Plume and Steel Plume. Then, he sat cross-legged on a meteorite not far away and began to refine them. He planned to refine the auras of the two and then arrange a tracking array. With the auras as a guide, he would be able to track the exact location of Fire Plume and Steel Plume. Of course, this required a very complicated technique and an extremely high level of array Dao. Master Yuan Hui would need a long time to refine them completely. However, once he finished refining them, Fire Plume and Steel Plume wouldn't be able to escape. In the starry sky, the space-time roulette continued to fly and finally came to a stop on a remote meteorite. Will Brother Zhou be alright? Zoda is said to be the strongest guard by Huang Zhe's side. He's a heaven's will expert, Tong Chimei said with a sobbing tone. Mu Chenxue fell silent. Her beautiful eyes were filled with worry. Although she was very confident in Zhuowen, his opponent was a heaven's will expert after all. He was a second-step Dao confirming expert and was much stronger than Old Bai and Old Wu. Fire Plume and Steel Plume looked at each other and saw the helplessness and pity in each other's eyes. They admitted that Yun was very strong, but the heaven's will expert had already surpassed the first-step Dao confirming. No matter how strong Yun was, how could he be a match for Zoda? You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.